Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you to the Historic Architecture Review Board meeting. Obviously, I am not Chair Baker or Vice Chair Linda Woodcock. They both asked me to step in tonight for various reasons, so I'm going to do my best to keep us moving along this evening. And to that end, could I have a motion to approve the agenda as it was published?
Motion to approve.
I have a motion from Board Member Urchin. And I have a second from, was it from you? From Peggy. Okay. I do not have, well, I heard it from this way and that way at the same time. I don't have any changes. I have a motion, probably second on the floor. Any questions or comments on the motion on the floor from the board? Hearing none. If you'll put our telephone number up. Ladies and gentlemen, we are doing a hybrid Zoom meeting. That means that we have a live feed and we have a YouTube feed. There's about a 30-second delay in our YouTube feed. So when we go to public comment, you're going to hear us kill about 30 seconds to make sure those watching at home have plenty of time to see the phone number that's on the screen now and to dial in and make sure their voice is heard. So if you would like to make a comment on the motion on the floor, which is just to approve the historic review board agenda, now's the time to call in and make that comment. You can accomplish that by dialing the phone number on the screen. That'll get you in the meeting. Once you're in the meeting, look to the bottom of your screen. You see the little hand symbol. Click that hand symbol and make sure you have the opportunity to address the board. Dallas, do we have any hands raised? Okay. We'll come back for a roll call vote. Gavin?
Aye.
Okay, while we get Gavin's audio, I'm going to go to Miss Linda.
Aye.
I'm trying to read your lips, Miss Linda, but
Aye.
aye. All right. And Joe? Bill? Jessica?
Aye.
Naeem? Peggy? Gavin, do we have you back?
Yes, aye.
Motion passed unanimously. Thank you, sir. Okay, we will now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll come back for an approval of the minutes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For all.
All right, can I have a motion to approve the minutes as they were given to you in the backup material, December 7th, 2020 minutes?
Motion to approve.
I have a motion from Board Member Jessica,
Second.
a second from Board Member Naeem. Any questions or comments on the minutes from December 7th from the board?
Lily, when you get a minute, no hurry.
Seeing and
I
hearing
have
none,
some-
if you'll put our telephone number up, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the December 7th Historic Architectural Review Board meeting minutes. I have a motion, probably second on the floor, to approve those minutes. If you have a comment about the minutes, now would be the appropriate time to do so as soon as we get the phone number up. We're going to begin with live comment in the chamber, then we're going to move to virtual comment. If you'd like to call in and make a comment virtually, all you need to do to accomplish that is dial the phone number on your screen. That'll get you in the meeting. Once you're in the meeting, look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little hand symbol. Simply click that hand symbol. That'll let us know you'd like to address the board. We'll make sure you have the opportunity to do so. Do I have any live comment on the December 7th, 2020 Historic Architectural Review Board minutes? Seeing none, do we have any virtual comments? Seeing none, we will come back for a roll call vote. Gavin?
Aye.
Ms. Linda? We'll come back to you, Ms. Linda. Joe? Bill? Jessica?
Aye.
Naeem? Peggy? Ms. Linda, do we,
Yes.
was that a yes vote?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Yes.
Unanimously.
Aye. Yes.
Now we've come to public announcements. Ladies and gentlemen, your board members like to hear from you. I'd like to give you an opportunity to make any announcements at the beginning of the meeting, so you don't have to wait to the end. If anyone would like to make an announcement, all you need to do is make your way to the podium. And if we can get our telephone number back on the screen one more time. Or is this our announcements? It's not public announcements. That's commission meeting, not HARB. Never mind. The announcement is just to change the July meeting date due to Monday, July 5th, 2021, in observance of the 4th of July holiday. Okay, so it's not an announcement, it's an agenda item. Okay, so would a board member like to make a motion to change the July meeting date to the 5th? I have a motion from Bill, a second from Joe. Any questions or comments from board members?
I have a question. The P and Z I thought was changed to July 6th.
Right.
And we're gonna do a historic on the 5th and then. Okay, never mind. Thank you. I just wanted to verify that we're.
All right, good clarification. Any other questions or comments from the board members?
So I have a question.
Miss Linda, are you making a comment to me? I can.
I'm asking a question.
What question is that?
Just if we're gonna have July the 5th is what is P and Z, July the 6th, and historic is the 5th?
No, they'll
What?
both be on July the 6th.
Okay, good. That's what I was confused about.
All right. Okay, so I have a motion by Bill, a second by Joe. Could you put our phone number back up, Janine? Ladies and gentlemen, we have a motion on the floor, properly seconded, to shift Monday, July 5th, P and Z and HARB meeting, or is it just P and Z, to the 6th, in observance of the 4th of July, just HARB. Okay. We have no further comment from the dais. So if you'd like to call in and make a comment on the motion on the floor, which is to shift that meeting to the 6th, now would be the appropriate time to do so. All you need to do to accomplish that is dial a phone number on your screen. That'll get you in the meeting. Once you're in the meeting, simply look at the bottom of your screen, see a little hand symbol. Click that hand symbol. That lets us know that you'd like to address the board. Make sure you have the opportunity to do so. We're going to start with live comment, and then we'll move to virtual comment. Anybody live in the chamber like to make a comment on the motion on the floor? Seeing none, do we have any virtual comment? Seeing none, we'll come back for a roll call vote. Gavin?
Aye.
Ms. Linda?
Aye.
Joe? Bill? Jessica?
Aye.
Diane? Peggy? Motion passes unanimously. That will take us to no old business and new business. Item 3 on tonight's agenda, consideration of update to Newberry Historic Resources Survey, including the historic district sites, buildings, and structures. Brian, are you taking us through that, or is that Wendy?
That would be me.
You're muted, Wendy.
That would be me.
All right, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. This item is bringing this before you to go over the reason why we have a historic survey and why we did one before, and kind of that little bit of history. And if we could put up that PowerPoint. Are we up? We are up. Okay. So if we go to, let's see, I don't have control. So if you go to the next slide, just if you could just go through, then pretty much just talk about the history. And then originally the first survey of historic resources in the community was done back in 1986 to look at all the historic and architectural resources. And then that's how we came up with the historic district that we have now. And looking at the next slide, there were more than 70 buildings at that time and that were included in the district. And we did a report and it had recommendations, and we had a consultant who conducted that survey, Murray Laurie. And the next slide, and one of the recommendations was for establishment of the district, and that's what we have now, because it had a significant concentration of historic buildings and structures. And the next slide. So as a result of that survey, the district was listed in the National Register of Historic Places. That was back in 1987. The boundaries of the district and the list of contributing and non-contributing buildings was accepted and became the basis for the Newberry historic preservation regulations and for our plan. And those buildings that are listed in there, some of those since that time had been demolished or changed. The next slide gives you that essentially we looked at contributing buildings. So the ones that are contributing are the ones that are definitely meeting the criteria for being historic and having some significance over 50 years of age, and some and the integrity of the building is preserved such that it shows about the history of the area and the significance of Newberry itself and the kinds of things that have gone on in Newberry over the years. And the next slide, this is the district that we have now. And this is what from originally in 1987. You can see the outline going all the way over to the other side of State Road 45 up in the northern area, right up past the railroad. So the next slide, just a couple views. We've got the City Hall building on your right, and on the left, what is now 1906, used to be the Newberry Backyard Barbecue. Next slide. Couple of the houses in the area. You see the one on the left that actually has become an office now. Next slide. So in 2010, we got a grant for historic preservation. It was a certified local government grant, which allows you to do planning and surveying. And so we did do that additional survey update at that time. So that was the next one. And some of the contributing buildings were taken off the list because they were no longer there. And then the data was checked, gone through, and some other recommendations were made for things in the future as well. The next slide, the survey design pretty much go through and recording the location, the architectural details and historic information. Then that's what's provided to the Florida Division of Historical Resources. And we do have, that's the book that was provided to you, and we do have it on file for any member of the public who would like to have it. Next slide. Essentially, this is a site file form. It's just, it'll go through and provide information about the building, what we know historically, the picture of it, and the location. Next slide. Again, this is the Sanborn map. These are the original maps that documented where the different locations were for the different buildings and properties in the community for Newberry, from the original Newberry. Next slide. And then we have different photos and maps that we've collected from a lot of the community and from historical documents and things that have the pictures of what it used to look like. And it helps you know kind of what kinds of planning decisions can be made and what kind of historic resources the city has, and how to make the most of those and include those in your preservation planning. The next slide, please. Architectural details are looked at as well. We did come up with a walking tour brochure as well, and that is available too. And some of those buildings are no longer around, though. A couple of them had to be demolished, like the Kincaid building, because of the termites, and it was just too far gone. We do have that. So the next slide. So looking ahead, typically you want to try to do a survey every 10 years or so, but that doesn't usually happen in a lot of communities, especially small communities. The next grant cycle that's coming up is we could apply, if they do, depending on the legislative appropriations, that would be in the spring of this year to apply for the fiscal year 2022-2023 funding cycle. And this would be under the certified local government funding. Just to let you know, that's an opportunity we could go forward to help pay for this kind of a survey to update our records, and that it will also doesn't require any match, which is good. The 50,000 is the maximum amount that's usually allotted for the surveying. And the next slide. So the survey, why do we want one? I mean, it does provide support for Newberry's Main Street program. It's part of the certified local government program, which helps you to get different kinds of funding for your historic preservation efforts. And it does help to share this type of information and resources with the public and with others. So the next slide. So there is also the tax credit aspect that people who have historic properties and wish to apply for investment tax credits can do so. Owners of properties actually listed on the National Register itself can be eligible for 20% investment tax credit. The next slide. Another opportunity for the survey process is to determine eligibility for state and federal grant programs and to educate the citizens about the benefits of historic preservation. One of the things that we did at our last grant funding back in 2011 was to hold a workshop to have the public come and give them a presentation on what historic preservation is and how our district works and what the requirements are that we have in place and why it's good and what's, just to help people understand what historic preservation is. And the next slide. Questions. So what I'm looking for here is just to see if it's about the right time that you would like to go ahead and direct staff to look into updating our survey and looking into funding for that. And just wanted to give you a little history of what had gone on before.
Thank you, Miss Wendy. Okay, so we'll get rid of the echo and then we'll see if any board member, first let's start with questions. And then if we have no questions, we'll see if there's a motion to direct staff to go after funding for this. Ms. Payton.
Mostly it's a comment. I know in Main Street, we used to have a lot of people come in who were visiting and wanted information about a walking tour in town and such. And we really didn't have anything at that time. We had this booklet that we could share with them, but it wasn't easy to follow it as far as a tour goes. So as far as people coming to visit us, it would be nice if when we update, we could modify it so it could be also more useful to inexperienced people in the area.
Agreed. Any other thoughts?
That question,
Joe?
along those lines, and then this is what I need. Obviously, the grants and can you hear me now? Okay. My question is, as far as the comments about maybe creating a walking tour, is this something, and a question for Wendy, that can be funded through a grant as well? Because I know we're talking about the updating, the site surveys for the 2022, but I was curious if there were funding for sources available to develop like a walking tour for Newberry Historic District.
Mr. Chair, yes, there are opportunities for different kinds of funding, different grants that are out there for specifically walking tours, but part of the planning survey grants, as we did in 2011, is we were able to produce a brochure at that time that reflected a bunch of the historic buildings and showed a little map and how to walk around. But now we could even look at doing some tour where you're listening, you have something you can tune into and hear and stand in front of each building and hear about them. They do have grants for those, so we certainly could look into that as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board members? Gavin, I can't see you, so if you have a question, just pipe up, and if someone else is in the middle of talking, we'll make sure we get back to you.
10-4, I have nothing.
Wendy, can you tell me how time extensive to go after this process is it on staff? What are we looking at, and what is our best hope to get back in return from it?
Well, first, we have to wait and see if there actually will be a cycle this next year, and we're assuming there will be. Right now, planning staff, we are overwhelmed with projects. That is true. And this would take some time to prepare. We could look at a consultant to do that. But that's another cost that would be on the city itself. That's not borne by any kind of a grant fund. It is something to consider, just mainly if it's something that we want to look into It may not be feasible this year. We may have to wait till next year. But we wanted to make sure that this was something you're aware of and that you would like to look into.
But this, what we're talking about here tonight, could not be used to do some of the interesting history tourism things that have been questioned. I'm just making sure
Yes,
I understood that
This,
right.
the funding often has, as we did before, had a public participation, public information aspect. So part of that was putting on a workshop and putting together a walking tour, something like that. It can be funded through that. But there may be some other, I know that in the past, I've seen some grants that would be a lot less work that may be feasible for doing just the walking tour itself. And we could look into that. I could just do some research here and there, but it does take staff time to devote to any of this kind of research and putting together a grant application.
Alex, do you have something to add?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor / Chair. The city does have grant writers underneath contract where we pay basically a retainer. So we could direct our grant writers to write this grant. It wouldn't cost the city any additional expense. And those, like I said, those grant writers are contracted, so it wouldn't put too much more of a burden on our existing staff.
And Wendy, I'm by your timeline, this is not something that this board has to decide tonight. Is this board ready to decide tonight? Do you want to table it and think about it and come back and decide if this is something we want to spend staff time pursuing, or? I'm ready.
I think just looking for, if the board would like to support this kind of thing, we will certainly look at it and give you a report back on what we find out as far as what's available and what the opportunities are, and we can go from there if you'd like.
What kind of motion are we looking for?
Well, that would, Ms. Winnie, why don't we wait and hear what the motion is? And then if we don't like the motion, then you can re-offer to go out and look for other things and come back. Okay, does someone want to make a motion?
Mr. Chair, I've moved that we direct staff to coordinate the updating of the city's historical resources survey. Report back to us if there's any problem.
Okay, I have a motion from Bill to direct staff to begin planning for this.
I second that
And I
motion.
have a second from Naeem. Questions or comments on the motion on the floor from the board?
I have a question.
Hearing
we get-
none.
Can you
Jenny will
hear
put our-
me? Oh, man, Jordan.
Oh, there you go. Miss
Hello?
Linda, go ahead.
Yes, I know I'm not muted, okay?
We've got you
If we
now.
get if we get the grant is applied for, and the city obviously is going to pay someone to write the grant. And then we get the grant money. Who is in charge? If we get $100,000, who is in charge of the budget?
You are.
And where does the money, how do we decide who gets parts of that budget?
Mr. Chair, the funding goes to the city, and 50,000 is the maximum because there's no match for CLG grant. But that money is it goes for the things that are listed and identified in your program that you submit for your grant. It's very specific, and typically you might hire a consultant to prepare certain things, and then the staff reviews to make sure that it's on target. But the money is actually managed by the city, which would be according to that grant program that was submitted and approved and funded.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions from the board? Janine, if you'll put our telephone number up. I have a motion, probably second on the floor, to direct staff to pursue funding for the Historic Resources Survey. If you'd like to call in and make a comment on that motion, now's the time to do so. All you need to accomplish that is dial the phone number that you see on your screen. Well, that will get you into the meeting. Once you're in the meeting, at the bottom of your screen, you see a little hand symbol. Simply click that hand symbol. That'll let us know you'd like to address the board. We'll make sure you have the opportunity to do so. We're going to begin with live comment from the chamber, and then we'll move to virtual comment. Do we have anyone live in the chamber tonight who'd like to speak to the motion on the floor? Seeing none, do we have any virtual hands raised? Dallas or Jenny? Seeing none, we'll come back for a roll call vote. Gavin,
Aye.
Linda,
Aye.
Joe,
Aye.
Bill, Jessica,
Aye.
Naeem, Peggy. Motion passes unanimously. That does it for our new business. We're on to topics from members for discussion. Don't go anywhere. We have a P and Z meeting directly to follow. Let's start with Gavin. Do you have any topics, any hard topics you want to bring up?
I have none.
Ms. Linda, do you have any hard topics you want to bring up?
None.
Joe,
None.
Bill, Jessica, Naeem, Peggy? I have none as well. There should be an opportunity here for public comment on this agenda. I don't see it, but I'm going to go ahead and call for any public comment at the end of the night for any of the HARB business. Seeing none, this HARB meeting is adjourned. Take a 2-minute recess. Let anyone who would like to exit the building, and then we'll immediately call the P and Z meeting to order.
Yes, sir.
All right, folks, thank you for the small break in between the HARB and the P and Z. And Jenny, give me the thumbs up when we are live. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to this regularly planned planning and zoning board meeting of Monday, March the 1st. Welcome to March, everybody. I'd like to begin with an approval of the agenda. Before we approve the agenda, are there any board members who would like to make any comments? Board member Naeem.
I want to see if we can move item 6, 7, and 8 to be postponed to a special P and Z meeting held on March 15th. And item 9 be postponed to April 5th, P and Z meeting.
Now, you know that you have an opioid task force meeting on March 15th, Naeem, so you already have one conflict.
Still want
You fit them both in.
to, I can multitask, man. It's the Cuban in me that can do more than one thing.
Okay. Staff, do we have any problem moving those to the March 15th?
No, Mr. Mayor, in fact, staff.
Board,
supports it.
thank you. Board members, do we have any problem with moving those three to a special P and Z meeting on March 15th?
What do you think, George? Can we get through 7 and 8 pretty quick? I mean, they're just changing from county agriculture to city agriculture.
That's what I would say.
We can cut some of this.
Mr. Mayor,
Oh, agriculture piece. Okay, yeah, that's a big deal. Okay, I'm sorry.
Ms. Linda?
could someone please repeat the ones that they want moved? I only got 2 of them down.
6, 7, and 8.
Okay, thank you.
And 9 moved, I'm sorry, part of that was not, item number 9 moved to April 5th. Is that the date, the notes? Staff doesn't have an objection to that either?
No, Mr. Mayor, actually, staff supports it.
Okay. So staff is supportive of moving 6, 7, and 8 to a special March 15th, item 9 to April 5th. Bill?
Just one more comment. Can we kind of, I know this is for time, we don't want to be here all night. Can we set ourselves a time limit? And if we can get some of this done in the time limit, we'll do it. And otherwise we'll move it because we got a bunch of stuff at March 15th too. And I know Janine's got 67 projects in the backlog. Mr. Mayor, we're only kicking the can
Down the road.
Making it worse for ourselves.
Brian?
Mr. Mayor, staff actually requested this change because we
Okay. All right. Never mind.
don't have those items prepared yet.
Oh, okay.
Oh, well, that puts a different light on it.
Did you say that?
You say that and it would be a short conversation. Okay. So I have a motion, right? By Board Member Naeem,
Second.
a second by Chair Baker. Any questions or comments on the motion on the floor to move 6, 7, and 8 on tonight's published agenda to March 15th, which will be a special meeting on my wife's birthday. Thank you, Naeem. And item 9 to April 5th, which is the next P and Z meeting. Does that take anybody? Did I say, what did I say? April 9 to April 5th. Does that take any live folks here out of the running for what you came here tonight? Okay. All right. Jenny, if you'll put our phone number on the screen, please. If there are no more comments from the board, we'll go to public comment. Ladies and gentlemen, we are running a hybrid live/Zoom meeting, which means we've got a 30-second delay on our YouTube feed. So we're going to kill a little bit of time every time we go to the public to make sure we give people plenty of time to dial in, make sure their voices are heard. If you're watching the P&Z tonight and you'd like to dial in and have a comment on the motion on the floor, which is to approve the agenda, moving item 6, 7, and 8 to March 15th and moving item 9 to April 5th, now would be the time to do so. You can accomplish that by dialing the phone number on your screen. That'll get you in the meeting. Once you're in the meeting, simply look at the bottom of your screen, you see a little hand symbol. Click that hand symbol. That'll let us know you'd like to address the board. Make sure you have the opportunity to do so. We're going to begin with live comment, then we'll go to virtual comment. Do you have anybody live in the chamber who'd like to make a comment on the motion on the floor? Come on down. Board member, certain. Good evening. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is. She was just about to introduce herself. Is your little green light on?
Push the button and turn the green light on.
My name is Tina Certain, and I'm a member of the Alachua County School Board. My comments are not necessarily to the motion, but I would like to just add why I came, because they do impact these three items here, or kind of related to that. I was actually coming to comment on the three items that are here because of the development that's impending, that'll be considered here, will have an impact on school capacity. And you all may have heard that the district is getting ready to undertake a comprehensive rezoning. The Newberry school concurrency area could actually be impacted because, as you all know, K-4 is at the elementary school, which is bursting at the seams, and 5-8 is at Oakview. There is, and the high school is getting there, and we know the facilities, existing facilities that are there are pretty much landlocked in a sense of where, with the exception of Oakview, they've got more property there, but the middle and elementary school, high school and the elementary school are landlocked. So I just kind of wanted to come and bring that to your attention that, future development, housing, residential development that would have a school impact could be impacted, and that everyone wants their children to go to school in the community where they live closest to. But if there's not capacity and we don't have that, we'd have to move, we may possibly have to move kids to a different school from in the community. So we don't want the residents of our wonderful city of Newberry to be dismayed and to purchase a home with the intent, and they may think that they may go to school at the, your local school, your neighborhood school, elementary, middle, and that might not be, we may not be able to accommodate that. So that was my comment. I'm hoping, I didn't bring my calendar with me or update it to see if I'll be able to come back on March 15th and on April 5th, but I will try to do my best to do it at that time.
I'll text you a reminder.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Can we ask the?
Sure. Mr. Would you like to, would you mind taking a couple questions?
Sure, I'll answer the best of my ability.
So, we really need a new school in Newberry, but you all changed the districts so that the school districts, so that everyone is adjacent with another one. And so we don't show as being overcrowded because there are still seats and classrooms in the east. And is there any way we could go back to the old district lines that show that this district is over capacity and allow us to get a school built? Or
so is it board member Conrad?
Yes,
Conrad, thank you for asking that. I agree with you that the school concurrency districts were changed, and that was before I came on the board, where it in essence really looks like we're never out of concurrency for schools because all the districts are touching, contiguous. And myself and the superintendent and a couple staff members are meeting with the consultant that does that. And that's one of the options that we are exploring now to increase the number of school concurrency areas, service areas. But then that brings us to the point of how will we pay for a new school? So school I is about $25 million we spent on that school up there of the sales tax proceeds. And I know we came out to Newberry, which not when I say we, meaning the board came out to Newberry and all of the municipalities and shared when the sales tax initiative was on the ballot of the projects that would be going. And all of the 12 years of the tax revenue, as well as the 1.5 millage, ad valorem millage, has pretty much, not all of it, but 80% of the ad valorem has been pledged to projects to refurbish and refresh existing schools. So there's not in the plan for the next 12 years to build a new school. And the state of Florida, unfortunately, is not giving out PICO money to public schools. The charters are getting that money. So I can't promise you a new school that we will have the money to build a new school. And that's something that we're going to be asking and sharing with developers. This is a problem that we have in our community, and we have a lot of growth that's coming westward. And previous boards did not enact impact fees or any other type of developmental fees on developers to try to fund that. So even if we change the concurrency areas, increase it, which I think does need to happen, there is still the question that we have to answer is how will we raise the funds to build the school,
And I think we're willing to accept that question.
Mhm.
We've got development is just overwhelming us. We're one of the fastest growing cities, Newberry is, in the state of Florida.
That's why I'm here tonight.
If it takes some concurrency or impact fees to kind of take the edge off of, that's probably just the thing. But then when we go and say, do we have concurrency for this new development, you all say, yes, we have lots of seats because we've changed the district.
They changed the districts and the way it is. And you know what, member Conrad, actually, the state legislator has really tied almost the hands of us. Like, we can't say you can't build a school because of, build homes because there's no school space in your community.
But you can say you have to pay a fee, right?
We can do
School
that.
concurrency.
We can do that, yeah, we can do that. So that's the direction that, one of the directions that we're exploring, to move forward, is that we have a lot of growth west, and we got to figure out a way of how to manage that, and aside from even building the school, once we get it built, then we have to figure out how we're gonna to pay to operate it, because what we don't have more students in the district. We still have 29,000 students thereabout.
Mhm.
We have students that have relocated farther west. So that would entail us trying to figure out and determine consolidation of school buildings and closings and offerings and things of that nature, because if we bring another school online, which is what, we had to deal with it with School I getting ready to open, we may have to take another school offline if we don't get, because we get our money from the state of Florida based on full-time equivalency units. They call it cheats in the seats. So if the new development is not bringing new students in and it's just bringing, moving them out here, folks don't want to change schools. You know how passionate people are
Yeah.
about moving their children from one school to another, but if we don't.
And if I could just interject, because we moved 4 things off, but we largely did that because the things that we have on are going to be in-depth conversations. I would
In-depth.
love to have you come
And I'll
back
be
out.
back. I'll be back. I'll try to
And
come
maybe
back for
we could
sure.
include that as parts, not as part of these, because I think that wouldn't be fair to these quasi judicials, but let's put an item on the agenda, maybe for the same night we can have this conversation. Trust that the commission and this board spend an awful lot of time talking about the school board and the school board policies and all this kind of, so anytime you guys come out, it generally inspires a lot of conversation. So I
Thank you.
appreciate you being here. I'll send you that reminder and
I've
I'll
got
ask
it
staff
written
to
down
get
too.
with you.
Thank you,
All right.
okay?
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, and we still are on the vote to approve the agenda, right? Okay, do we have any virtual comment? I'm assuming that 30 seconds went up. We didn't have any. We'll go back to the roll call vote. Gavin,
Aye.
Ms. Linda,
Aye.
Bill,
Aye.
Jessica,
Aye.
Naeem. Motion passes unanimously. Now this one is public announcement, right? Threw me off last time.
Mayor Marlowe, I have a
Pledge
question
of
before we
Allegiance. All right, if you
go
could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
States of America,
to the
to the
republic
republic for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, do I have a motion to approve, review and approve the February 1st, 2021 Planning and Zoning Board minutes? I do have one announcement that Linda Woodcock's Form 8B will be filed with the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Motion to approve.
I have a motion from Chair Jessica,
Second.
a second from Naeem. Any questions from the board on the motion on the floor? Seeing none, if you put our telephone number up, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the approval of the minutes. I have a motion, probably second on the floor, to approve the minutes with the announcement that board member Woodcock's Form 8B will be filed with the minutes. If you'd like to call in and make a comment on that motion, now's the appropriate time to do so. All you need to do to accomplish that is dial the phone number on your screen. That'll get you in the meeting. Once you're in the meeting, look at the bottom of your screen, see a little hand symbol. Simply click that hand symbol. It'll let us know you'd like to address the board. Make sure you have the opportunity to do so. We're going to begin with live comment, then we'll go to virtual comment. Do we have anybody live in the chamber tonight that'd like to make a comment on the minutes? Seeing none, do we have any virtual comment? Seeing no, come back for roll call vote. Gavin,
Aye.
Ms. Linda,
Aye.
Bill, Jessica,
Aye.
Naeem. Motion passes unanimously. We have no old business. Gavin, you have your hand up?
I do. It's not related to this item, though. We can move forward with this item. I have a question on
Okay.
Miss comment.
We have no old business. That's gonna take us to new business. I'd like to start with the announcement that items 2 through 5 are gonna be heard by the city commission for first reading on March 22nd. So our first item under new business, creating a city ordinance to allow for longer stays in recreational vehicle parks and commercial campgrounds, increase the maximum allowable number of park model RVs. And that, Brian,
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mayor. Thank you. Just 1 minute. Take this off so I don't mumble into the microphone. This item before you is a request by M3 Development, who are also the developers of the Treehouse Village RV Resort that's going in up on State Road 45 across from the Easton Newberry Sports Complex, to request amendments to the city's land development regulations to extend the length of stay, the allowable length of stay for tenants at the RV resort, as well as to extend the number of allowable park model rental units. If you remember, this was a topic of discussion before when it came before, with special exception came before you. And I believe the recommendation then was to increase the length of stay and the number of tenants, perhaps not as much as they've asked for here. Currently, the city's LDRs, land development regulations, require that RV tenants vacate after a minimum of 90 days is the maximum allowable. It's been on the books for a long time. This is the first actual RV park that we have under development in the city of Newberry. So I think those regulations were originally placed on the books back in around about the same time that then Nations, now Champions Park, was being under development. The applicants are requesting the change because their market research shows that the high-end RV market, a lot of snowbirds are tending to come in earlier in the fall season and leave a little bit later in the spring season, and want to give them the opportunity to stay as long as they would like. And so they're asking that we change the 90-day requirement to 270 days, which would be equivalent of 9 months. I did a little bit of quick and dirty research and made some phone calls and pulled up a bunch of websites looking at trying to find other higher end RV resorts around the general vicinity. Got Williston Crossing, of course, down 121 in Williston, North Ocala, which is in North Ocala. Southern Leisure, that's a resort in Chiefland, and then the Gulf Coast, which is down on Highway 19 in Levy County, down by the intercoast, or down on the Gulf Coast and across next to the cross-border of Arch Canal. And so none of them actually place any limitations on the length of stay, which I thought was a little bit surprising, but in conversations with a couple of them that I was able to get on the phone, the managers, they told me that basically even though they don't have a limitation on the length of stay, the average, especially for those that are 55 and under, which is the same as I believe this RV park here or resort here in Newberry will be, especially in the 55 and under, they don't tend to stay more than about a month at most. They did say that they had a few long-term residents, but the turnover is much greater than that. Now the 55 and over community, there's more opportunity because you have a lot more retirees, and so they have more time that they can spend in one location. I just want to throw that out there that surprisingly, I assumed that there would be limitations, but I didn't find any on any of these. And so similar to the previous request, they also state that they need to, the high-end luxury RV market likes to bring in friends and family when they're visiting a location for a few months. They like to be able to bring friends and family in to stay with them, but not that close. They want to have them available in the park with them so they can all share the same amenities and whatnot, but have their own accommodations where they can stay in their own either park model, RV, or perhaps a cottage. And so they're requesting that the allowable number of park models be expanded from the current limit of 10% of total RV sites to 40%. That would basically mean that, currently with 850 total units allowed if the development continues to the full extent that they can develop, you'd have right now 85, and that would, the phase one, you'd have about 34, and that would move up to 140 potentially. And the entirety of development would mean that you could go to up to 340 park models as compared to the current limit of 85. And so just to be clear, as far as what is a park model is basically it's actually licensed as an RV. It looks like a little tiny house. A lot of people use them as tiny homes, but that's generally what it is. It is built and designed to a different standard. It's built to RV specs instead of HUD specs. So we've got typically a park model RV is less than 400 square feet, and that's built to the RV standard. And if you go to up to over 400 and up to 500 square feet, then it has to meet HUD standards. Very similar to a manufactured home, a mobile home is designed to HUD standards as well. And they are subject to on-site home installation inspections, meaning if they're going to be there for any length of time, they're not going to remain mobile, then they would be mounted somehow so that they would withstand wind and those kind of things if a big storm came up. So they wouldn't have to be moved. Typically, somewhere between 90 to 100% of the units are built in a production facility, not on site. They're towable, of course, on public byways, and so that limits the width. They require annual registration, tags, and insurance, just like a regular RV would. And they feature regular home style amenities inside, which is why a lot of people use them as tiny homes as well, tiny homes on wheels. And typically they would, in a RV resort, they'd be required to connect to utilities just like a regular site-built structure. The wheels, typically, I think probably to preserve them are taken off, but they can be left on or they can be taken off. But either way, they would, based on our land development regulations, they'd have to be skirted so you wouldn't see the wheels. Likewise, the tongue is typically hidden, so you don't see the tongue. And so the request, when it boiled down to the draft ordinance, is actually quite simple. Under section 4.2.37.4, under general requirements, paragraph 3, the request is to change the 90 consecutive days to 270 consecutive days. And then in subparagraph 5, changing the limitation of 10% of the overall spaces permitted to 40%. And then under commercial campgrounds, where they talk about permanent rental cottages and cabins, then again, it just asks to go from 90 consecutive days to 270 consecutive days. And so just a few comments about the potential for the development. We do think that staff thinks that this is a diversification of on a couple of issues, a diversification of our local economy. People who come into RV parks, as we talked about during the special exception phase, do tend to come in, spend their money in the local community while they're camped out there, go out exploring and whatnot. It also is a diversification of housing in a sense, although these do not establish permanent housing. And we have confirmed with the applicants that there would be no lease agreements allowable for these. These would be strictly on a temporary rental basis. So you wouldn't be, they wouldn't have their own utility bills. And where I'm going with that is they would not be able to provide, tenants there, even for up to 9 months, would not be able to obtain the documentation necessary to register children in school. I know that has been a concern, and they basically would not be able to do that living temporarily in an RV park, because they wouldn't be able to provide any of the proof of residency necessary to establish residency and get your kids registered for school. And so really with that, staff approves that the Planning and Zoning Board recommend approval of the draft ordinance to the City Commission.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Do we have questions, comments from board members?
I have a question for staff on this.
Naeem?
So you just answered a big question on the school situation. We obviously just had Tina up here talking about the schools bursting out of seams. How do we absolutely positively stop someone from saying living here, renting short term and going to the school? Like, how is there, I need to have like 100% guarantee on that.
If, Mr. Chair, if you can't provide the documentation that's required by the school board to establish residency, then you can't register your child in the local schools. And so typically you have to have either a lease or a mortgage. You have to have a utility bill. You have to, there's certain items that you would have to use that they'll accept as proof of residency, none of which you'd be able to obtain here because you're not paying utility bills, you're paying for the electricity to the RV resort. They're covering it. You don't have a metered bill that you'd be paying to the local utility. They're not going to have lease agreements. They just have nightly or weekly or monthly rental agreements, but there is no long-term lease. And so the documentation necessary to actually register a child in the local schools wouldn't be attainable.
So what's the difference between a monthly, isn't that a lease? Am I mistaken here? That
As far as I know, in the eyes of the law, it's not the same.
yeah, I'm kind of like perplexed on that.
You can't, when you go to register your kid for school, you've got to show 2 forms of residency. And they have to be valid forms of residency. Jeannie, we can't hear you when you speak from back there for the record. So if you want to make a comment, could you come? No. So I'd have to have something to actually show. I mean, I think I had to have a utility bill and I had to have a copy of,
I think I'm
The rent
correct
or
that they
the-
will not have an address.
yeah, the park has an address.
Right,
Each lot, each slip
right.
does not have an address,
That's my thoughts. Mhm.
right? And I would also say on this point, I rolled this point around in my head a lot. I just don't see this as being a big factor. Like there's a whole lot of RV people out there who are trying to sneak into a school district by renting a slip. We've got students in Newberry High School that live in Gilchrist County. And there's already so many, I guess, loopholes built into the system. People use their grandma's address or something like that. I mean, this seems like a problem that I'm not sure we can legislate our way out of if this is even a problem. So I'm
Mr.
having a
Chair,
hard time wrapping my head around this as the ultimate consideration for moving forward or not moving forward here.
Also, too, Mr. Chair, point out that if somebody who can afford one of these higher end RVs could afford to buy a piece of land or a house and establish your children that way, there wouldn't really be any. I could not think of any motivation why they would try to do it this way as opposed to just buying a house.
It was just pointed out to me that Florida statute 513.112, paren 3, 513.112 is maintenance of guest register and copy of laws. And paren 3 is when a guest occupies a recreational vehicle in a recreational vehicle park for less than 6 months, as evidenced by the length of stay shown in the guest register, there is a rebuttable presumption that the occupancy is transient. I don't know if we need to unmute the attorney now to.
Yeah, Janine, thank you. I was actually reading that as you were reading it. I'd have to probably research chapter 513 to understand what its application is, because that seems to be governing specifically mobile homes and recreational vehicle parks. And so I don't know if the context is the same when it refers to transient, how that fits into, what the school board's obligation is in terms of determining residency.
Well, Rich, before we chase this rabbit any further down this hole, is this still the P&Z's hiccup here? Or is this the question that is giving everyone pause? No, I have 2 head nods, no. I mean, I know it's a question, but Okay, so let's move on to another topic and then we'll come back to this because right now I feel like this is getting a little bit out of hand with trying to answer this question. And we have a long conversation tonight, so let's let that one simmer. Staff, try to get us concrete answer on residency. Rich, you can find chapter 7 or 5, whatever you were looking at. Naeem, did you have any other questions? Was that your concern?
In regards to that, I mean, other than that, I want to.
Okay. Other board member questions, comments? Bill?
I was, this is actually a second RV park that had planned. The first one didn't ever get built, but it was, you probably remember Jordan, down Half Moon Acres, Mr. Smith got it permitted for our RV park, and we wrote that ordinance with a lot of thought about how the RV park went hand in hand with our sports tourism vision, and it would be a place for people to come stay temporarily while they use the ball fields and all of our other sports tourism venues, and that's why we limited it to a short stay and a small number of the more permanent park models. So the big change in this one is that they want to extend it for snowbirds. Well, now we've got into a whole different field other than just supporting our sports tourism. Now we're talking about part-time residents that are down here for a long period of time and act more like our residents than people that are passing through and spending some money and moving on. So I'm trying to think through that, thinking, what supports our residents is property tax. We get most of our cities, half of our money comes from big commercial enterprises and the other half comes from property tax for the most part. And this is 850 units that won't pay property tax, as best I can figure. And I talked to the tax collector today, or I talked to Matt Geiger, and he said he looked at an adjacent, not a similar, but another RV park in Alachua, one of the few in Alachua County, and their amount of taxes collected from there was very minimal, under $10,000 for the whole place. And generally, we get the city of Newberry gets $650 to $1,000 per resident in property tax. One of the ways they collect taxes on these RVs is by a license plate. Like if it's a mobile, you can put a license plate on it, which is like $135 a year. But generally, there's no taxes on a park model except the overall property owner's tax on his commercial property. And he showed me, well, in the case of Alachua, they evaluated the property at several million, but the county only got $10,000 in taxes from the whole unit. And I'm sorry, I don't know, he didn't know the size of the thing, but anyway, it's very small numbers. And I talked to Mike about that earlier today. We're really not sure what we're going to get for taxes from this, but it is going to have an impact if you bring that many park models. How many park models did you say if we allow the 40%?
If Mr. Chair, if the development goes to its full potential of 850, then it'd be roughly 340
units. Will have an impact on our city. I think we will have to provide all the city services for those, just like their full-time residents. Fire support, ambulances for older people have injuries and medical ailments that require ambulance response, law enforcement, recreation, more traffic on the roads, and which is already overcrowded. So I'm interested in how much revenue this type of resident is going to bring, because we don't have any snowbirds in Newberry yet. A lot of our neighbors have a lot of snowbirds, and I'm not sure how that works out revenue wise, if they will be a revenue producer or a revenue user. But hesitant to just jump right into the thing where we say, "Well, let's become a community that welcomes the snowbirds." Because we're changing the land development regulations. You talk about high-end mobile homes as if this was the only one that have that it's going to affect. But once we change the LDRs, then every RV community behind them comes in with those same OVRs, and the next one might say, "Well, I want to put low-end houses in there, but your LDRs say I can have 40% park models, and I got some used park models out in the field here that I want to," and by right, if we put it in the LDR, so he now has that by right to put them in there. So that gives me a little concern.
Mr. Chair, I would say those are all excellent points. And
Hey, I'm sorry, Brian. Let's let him finish making his point.
I'm finished.
You are? Okay,
Yeah.
all right. I just
I
don't want to get you off. I know
Reserve
sometimes
the right.
I can't make it back.
Go
ahead, Brian.
Those are all excellent points. And just some information that I've gathered. The developer indicates that the overall development they estimate to be about $15 million. And so, whatever the commercial rate would be on that is what the tax base would generally be. Again, they are registered to the DMV because they're RVs, and so that doesn't transmit back to the city of Newberry. That tax goes to the state. The real benefit, I guess, that staff anticipates economically would be the money spent in the community by the people that are visiting. I was trying to think the other point, but
Brian, while you're thinking of the other point, because the things I was thinking about when Bill was talking, and I agree these are good points, but I think the reason we haven't had the RV park in the 10, 12 years is probably because our ordinance doesn't allow for what the market needs. It's solely driven on the recreation, and we don't have enough recreation to fill the RV park. So one of the reasons why it's been kind of a void for a decade is probably somewhere in line with this point. And I guess the other thing I was thinking, we spend an awful lot of time thinking we don't want to change the LDRs, we don't want to change an ordinance, but if we change the LDRs and we don't like what the developer does out there, how hard is it for us to go back and say, man, we blew that one, and that guy got away with it, but we're going to go back and reduce it back down? Is that
actually, Mr. But you just made both of the points that I was trying to remember. It is relatively simple to change the LDRs back if things aren't working out, and there have been a number of occasions, number of instances where we've talked about doing that.
and this can only happen by special exception.
Correct.
It has to hook into water and sewer.
Mhm.
So that limits how many more of these. That's another reason we struggle to get an RV park, because we have limited sites that have access to city water and sewer, the size that an RV park would need. And the whole thing is by special exception. So, there's an awful lot of checks and balances built into this that gives the P&Z and the commission the opportunity to say, no, we didn't like it. We didn't like the way this was working out. That's kind of where my head is going with those considerations, is that.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, and also too, to your other point about relative to the market. Again, it was only cursory research, but the places, the other RV parks they was able to communicate with didn't place limitations on there, and if we want to see this one be as successful as possible, it would be, in staff's opinion, a very limiting factor to be limited to 90 days when all the competition in the vicinity is basically even unlimited. And it would be potentially, to your point, maybe the reason nobody's developed one here yet.
Is that all the memories, I know you were trying to jog, did that jog any of your considerations?
Yeah, and I agree with what you say, Jordan, is that in our philosophy has been to enable developers to get what they want. But we haven't had snowbirds before, and if the city commission says part of our vision is to bring snowbirds to Newberry, then I'm going to do everything that planning and zoning wise. I'm going to recommend everything that I think is going to make us more competitive to get snowbirds to come here. But is that part of our vision? Do we want to be that kind of, because in my experience, we never really talked about that before. We all designed our LDRs for different things, and this is really the first time we've looked at a community of part-time winter residents. And I just want to make sure we know what we're doing before we recommend this to the commission. And I guess a lot of the vision has to come from the commission. And y'all are going to have a visioning session here in a few months. And hopefully that's something that you'll consider. Is that where we want to be in 10 years? Do we want to be a part-time residential community? Do we need that kind of diversity? Maybe we do. Maybe we don't. We got this other project that we approved last time. It was very big, and it was 55 plus, and this would be another group of 55 plusers that would be coming to us. But I don't know. I'm just feeling a little overwhelmed because we've got so much stuff coming into Newberry, and I'm wondering if our doors are open and everybody come in and do whatever you want, or do we have a vision where we're saying these are the kind of entities that we want to bring into the city, and these are the ones that we're not going to bend over backwards to bring them in. And I'm not saying I got an opinion either way. I just feel kind of rudderless here in it because we've approved so many different groups coming in. I just wonder if we're doing the right thing.
Okay. Gavin, your hand is still up. I'm not
Yes.
sure. Is your hand up for this item or still a
It
different
is.
item? Go ahead. You have the floor.
Great, thank you. So I wanted to point out a few things that staff presented, Janine mentioned, and by happenstance, I've uncovered with some work that I'm doing with a client on the coast right now. But Brian in his presentation talked about some neighboring facilities that he did research on that don't have a minimum stay, but also in his presentation, he mentioned that when talking to those managers, they say people only stay about 1 month. The language that Janine read defines transient as 6 months. And the work that I'm doing right now with a client is in the St. Augustine and Jacksonville market. They are short-term vacation rental owners that have a portfolio of properties in that category. And their research has shown that snowbirds are visiting Florida between January, February, March, and April for a maximum of 4 months. And some of those stays are only 3 months, depending on where they're coming from and how severe the winters are that they're escaping. So I am extremely hesitant to increase our maximum allowable stay beyond what our current language allows. I think going beyond the 3, maybe 4 months would be something I would consider. Month stay is leaving the definition of transient and becoming somewhat of a resident. And I just think it lends itself to the community growing in a different direction than where we've been, where our compass has told us to grow. It's just not something that I am encouraged to change.
Okay, thank you, Gavin. Naeem?
To jump on where Gavin was saying, that I had that note written down is why is this necessarily needed? Why do we need that verbiage of, if the research shows that these people are only staying for this amount of time, then it makes no sense into having that.
I want to clarify because we've had 2 or 3 different people offer sort of, we're not in quasi dispute, but testimony saying different market research. So Gavin just said what his research is showing. Brian said what his research is showing. The developer has different research.
I'm talking
So
about wording.
I just want to make sure when we say, well, if the research doesn't show this, we have sort of competing research here, which is the
Right.
question.
I'm not going off of research. I'm going off of wording.
Right, but Brian's research is that all the people surrounding don't have any verbiage on the link.
Honestly, I don't want us to become a Williston or a Cala RV center. I mean,
But to
I'm trying to
clarify,
which research you're citing.
I'm
when you say
not
the research
I'm not
is
citing on any. I'm literally getting to the point of why the verbiage. I understand why verbiage is important. However, I don't understand what's the big deal of, like, is a snowbird going to be like, oh, the wording says 6 months is my max stay, I'm not going to stay there now because I was going to stay there for 3 months, but they don't have unlimited stay. Like, why is it so important that we can't just have our verbiage of saying, hey, listen, Newberry wants it at 6 months. You really weren't planning on staying past 6 months anyways. Why do we need them to have a a free-for-all pretty much of you can stay unlimited. If what we're seeing is 1 month here, 3 months at max from, you know, I'm gonna go to the verbiage of the research here, but we got research saying 3 months, we got research saying 1 month. Well, bottom line is it doesn't make sense that we need to change our LDRs to what Bill's saying here that can actually hurt us in the future. I'm not saying this RV park is gonna not, I have a lot of faith in this RV park because the developer seems great, but I don't see, I can see us getting hurt by this, by changing the verbiage in our LDRs to have, there's no max amount of days you can stay. You're opening up a can of worms, in my opinion.
Mayor Marlowe, if I can
I
add
would
one
rather
thing
just
to-
leave it at 6 months or to something we can agree to, because they're not planning on staying more than that anyway. So why do we need to have that?
And just to add to the wealth of research, I just got texted from a local realtor who says that every RV park she knows has options for 9 months. So since we're just throwing out layman's research, I thought I'd throw that one out as well. Yeah. Okay, it was Naeem, and I can't tell what you're pointing at, Jenny. Linda Woodcock. Linda Woodcock, you have the floor. All right.
Oh, thank
And then
you.
it'll be Jessica.
I'm just going to go through these and then maybe we can move on, but these are my concerns. How do we control that I moved to Newberry and I'm like a University of Florida student and I'm going to be here for 2 years. So for me to lease a park model for 2 years is going to be a whole lot less expensive than leasing an apartment for $1,500 for a 1-bedroom in Gainesville or in Tioga or wherever. So I would much rather move there and do, I don't know how much they're going to charge for a park model, but that was one question. I think we really, us and the commission especially, are going to have more information. I still consider 9 months a permanent resident. Where that's just me. I don't care what we decide in the end. It does concern me that 40%, that's almost half of the spaces would be used for lease for park models. And I'm assuming a park model is very similar to a tiny house, but half of the project would be leased homes. I don't know. I guess that the builder developer will be in charge of collecting the money and making sure people behave. When we talk about snowbirds, I lived in Sarasota for a long time, and I can tell you that the impact is huge, huge. I was dumbfounded the first year when people from up north migrated into Sarasota. It's amazing. But the other thing that we're still dealing with, and that's a migratory thing, when people from cold areas want to move further south, especially they've retired and they want to play golf all day, whatever. We also are dealing the same thing with migratory issues from South Florida up to North Central Florida because we're the next obvious stopping place. So we're kind of in some ways caught between the two migratory issues there, that we're convenient stopping when you get into Florida. We're pretty convenient when you're leaving South Florida going further north to get out of the business down there. We're pretty convenient. This is the last, I promise this is the last, but when we say they will spend money in the community, somebody better tell me where the heck what are they gonna buy? A steak dinner, that's about it, or a pizza. So we don't even have store space downtown. So they're not spending money in this community, whatever they're doing, other than eating out. So let's not use that they would spend money in the community because there's nothing here to buy. And I appreciate the time, but I still do really believe 50%, 40% of those spaces being used for park models is a whole lot.
Okay, board member Jessica.
I wasn't expecting that, sorry. When you looked at some of those RV parks with no time limits, were there ordinances in those towns that limited the stays?
Mr. Chair, there was no way to get that kind of information on short notice like that. To my knowledge, if they don't have limitations, then they should not have ordinances prohibiting them, or else they'd have limits on their stays.
So,
The assumption is that they don't have them.
okay, my questions are a little disjointed because other people ask them, so I'm not gonna ask the same questions. What will their fire assessment be out at the park? Will it be based on ag or off of commercial?
It would be commercial. Definitely commercial. It's definitely not ag.
You might have to go to the
Okay.
store soon.
What is?
I'm gonna run out
the
of these.
reasoning on the 40%
Not gonna be
park
good.
model request?
Mr. Chair, that might be a question to ask the applicant when staff.
And will the
Questions to staff are over.
occupancy limitations on the park models mirror what the RVs have, or will it be different?
Mr. Chair, that's what the request is that they would all be the same
Okay,
at this point.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
I just want to say, if there's a joke going around the Zoom participants, you got to share it with the rest of us, because all of y'all are just cracking up over there, and there must be a chat. Must be a joke on chat.
We were
I see
laughing.
his hand. I just want to hear the joke first. Don't try to get me out of my joke, Janine. Come on. All right, board member Johnson. since
I
I'm
don't
not
want
gonna
to
give you the joke.
I don't want to tattle on member Woodcock, but it sounds like they need to go to the store pretty soon.
Go ahead, Gavin.
Thank you. I just have one last thing I want to point out, and I think that our board and the city commission should be mindful of how the language may change if this point is taken. But in the language, it specifically says that they are seeking longer stays to accommodate snowbirds. And I think that if we all put on a very simple thinking hat, snowbirds means folks leaving for the winter. And if you look at any definition of how long the winter season is, it is not 270 days. And I think that is an easy reason to decline the request to increase the length of stay. And I think that if the language changes in a future application from snowbird to another reason, then we have to evaluate, is that reason legitimate and does it fit with the vision of the city? But I think for that reason alone, defining the ask because it's necessary for snowbirds, winter is not 270 days. To me, there's no reason why we would argue that the request for 270 days is rational.
Okay, I want to move us along because it seems like the board is sharing a lot of the same concerns, and there's two concerns here. There's the length of stay, and then there's the percentage. And I want to make sure the developer has an opportunity to respond to both of those. And it seems like the bulk of our concerns have centered on the length of stay. Before I shift our thinking to the percentage, I want to take a shot at guessing why those other cities don't have limitation on the length of stay. And that's because there's in the city of Newberry, I can tell you there would be absolutely a very limited ability to enforce that. So knowing whether someone's been there for 8 months or 9 months or 6 months seems to me like we're putting an unnecessary burden on our staff, our enforcers. And at the end of the day, whatever time limit we put on there, the developer or whoever's operating the model could say, well, you have to move out of this unit and move over into the next unit. And now your clock starts all over again. So I always caution the commission against enforcing these rules that are really, really tough for us to enforce. It would take an awful lot of bookkeeping, an awful lot of accounting. And at the end of the day, besides for the school concern, I'm still having a hard time understanding what is the concern about how long somebody stays in our community. Because I love Miss Linda, but I disagree with her comment that there's nothing in Newberry to spend money on. And I would hope that all the downtown businesses see something, and maybe we get new businesses because there's other people who are looking for things to spend their money on. So Brian, I mean, speak a little bit to the enforcement side, because I really don't like passing laws that we can't enforce. And is this really, I believe this developer would adhere by the rules because they adhere by every rule we throw at them. But is there how could we enforce this? Are we going to go out there with chalk like a meter maid and say, okay, your 270 days starts now? And
Mr. Mayor,
somebody has to look through the books, right? Are you going to go out and look through the books? We got
Mayor.
4 members of P and Z. You want them to stop doing the grant for the historic
maybe
survey,
Rachel
so they can go down and read the books?
With all due respect, when someone complains about a food truck, I'm not gonna list the barbecue joints I love to complain about food trucks, but someone goes out to validate that complaint, or someone complains about an RV being parked in front of somebody's lawn for more than 24 hours. City gets a complaint about it. The city goes and does their job very well and research.
Who's going to complain about a tenant in an apartment?
I could tell you right now, there's about a forum that's about 400 comments deep that are asking these questions.
I think that's not a fair juxtaposition, right? A food truck that's sitting in a public right of way that everyone sees and potentially is causing traffic backup, and an RV park where somebody has been there for 8 months and somebody's got to keep track on up. You've been there for 8 months and 29 days, and now I'm going to call the city and complain because you got to move. I don't see those two situations being correlative.
So my thing with the whole clocks, and there is bookkeeping that is involved at some point, but to bring up the 40%, I'm more inclined to understand and be respectful to moving it up to 40%. But what concerns me is the 40% being included with the unlimited amount of time. That's what really scares me, is now you're asking me to potentially open up. And I hate to say it because I fought people that said it was a mobile home park. I know it's not a mobile home park, but that's what it's coming out to become, is we're going to bump this up another 30%, and we're asking for an unlimited amount of time to stay. So technically you just became a trailer park.
And we're admitting we can't enforce a stay rule.
Mr. Mayor, to your first point, it would fall on staff to enforce whatever time limit, and it would have to be done by the books kept by the RV resort. If there were a complaint, then it would fall into code enforcement to investigate and enforce. But you're right. There's nothing in our code right now that would prevent a tenant from moving from one spot to another and starting the clock over again, or leaving for a day and then coming back and starting it over again. So it would be challenging to enforce, but not impossible. But it would fall to staff to do an annual assessment of the books to make sure that they were in compliance.
And just to be clear, Brian, I'm not saying if this board and the commission draws that line in the sand, then I stand right with you and try and enforce it. My caution to fellow people who believe in small government is being really, really careful about which lines we draw in the sand. Because as a school teacher, I can tell you, you got to pick your battles. And if you're going to fight every single thing, you're not going to get to the lesson plan. And I want the city to get to the core of what we're trying to do. And I think this is something that we would struggle to enforce. It would take an inordinate amount of time. I'd much rather you guys be spending your time going after those grants for the historic surveys than going through their books to determine whether somebody's been there for 8 months. But I'm not a member of the P&Z. So if that's how you want the staff to spend their time, then that's how we will direct staff to spend their time. Let me go to Rich first, and then we'll go to board member Gavin and Linda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of enforcement, I did just read a little bit more into chapter 513, which Janine and Wendy, I think, brought to our attention. That's a state statute, and it does have some requirements in there in terms of the operator of the RV park maintaining a registry and requiring, there's a process in terms of the occupants having to, sign in, they have to keep a log, and it is a public record that can be made available upon request. Chapter 513 also refers to law enforcement. It doesn't specifically say what law enforcement, highway patrol or something more on the local level, but presumably there is the ability to enforce in that way. I do think what Brian is saying in terms of code enforcement, I do think that would be a viable option for us. And just as a recommendation or a suggestion, what we might want to do at the staff level is take a closer look at the state statute and the process and see if there's something there that we could somewhat parrot at a code enforcement level in terms of requiring the registry and having access to it and things like that. Just some ideas to throw out.
Okay, thank you, Rich. We'll go to Gavin, who oh, there you are. I got you. Your square moved. Go ahead, Board Member Johnson.
Thank you. Sure. I just wanted to highlight as well that if staff and you, Mr. Mayor, are admitting that we really don't have the capacity to enforce this kind of ordinance, that should even bring us more concern. If the length of stay is a concern for the folks on the board and hopefully for the commission, but we don't even have the ability to enforce that, then to Naeem's point, if a resident can move from unit to unit, or the perception can be given that a resident moved out for one day and moved back in, it's becoming a place of permanent residence, and it resembles a mobile home park, as there are essentially fixed units to the ground that individuals can rent for extended periods of time. It is no longer a luxury transient campground, in my opinion.
Brian?
Mr. Mayor, to
then
that
Ms.
point,
London.
these are not just going to be strictly long-term rental units. These are going to be the equivalent of a hotel room with cleaning service, daily cleaning service, and just as you would in a hotel room. That's what has been indicated by the applicant. And so it's not a matter of just setting up shop and leasing these places to live. And the expense, the nightly expense, the units that I was looking at, I have not discussed pricing whatsoever with the applicant, but the pricing that I saw at the other RV resorts I was looking at, they were in excess of $100 a night for a park model unit. And even with monthly discounts, that's going to be fairly excessive in terms of an option for, unless you're a person who's well off who can afford it anyway, just as a resident, a vacation home or something. But these are not meant to be, these are going to have, daily cleaning services and hotel services. So the potential for these to become a de facto mobile home park is limited at best.
Brian, do you know of any hotels that say you can only stay in our hotel for 270 nights in a row and then you have to move out, or is that?
Honestly, Mr. Chair, I've never looked into it, so I couldn't tell you, but I'm not aware of any.
Let's go to Board Member Linda, and then I think we're far enough along in the conversation for the developer to address some of the thoughts and considerations at this point. Okay, Ms. Linda, you got the floor.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Gavin covered what I was going to say pretty much. So, my big major concern here is the 40% of however many we got in the compound. 40% would be these park models, so-called park models, tiny homes, whatever you want to call them. That is when I first heard that we were going to have recreational vehicles. We have friends who travel all over the country in these and love them, and I think that would be great. But when I hear 50% is going to be tiny homes or rental property, that is a concern, and I think the BOA should take that into consideration. That's just my thought.
Okay,
And
thank
I
you, Ms.
think-
Linda. Okay, does the developer want to come down? We've heard concerns about both the length of stay and the percentages. We've heard concerns. If you can tell us a little bit of your pricing models, I think that may allay, because it seems like a lot of board member Johnson's concerns are people move in. So if we know what price range, if you're spending $100 a night, clearly no one is going to spend, very few people are going to spend, what's that, $3,000 a month to stay there. We've heard the permanent residents problems. Let's start with that, and
Well,
then other things will come to us as we go.
Real fast. I just want to make a comment. I really enjoy working with your development team. This is not about your call here. This is my fear, so you can understand where I'm coming from, is we say yes to you because we believe in your park. We believe in your development. I think you guys have a great model in place. However, my fear is saying yes to you opens up doors to another potential developer that could care less about Newberry as much as you guys actually care about. And that's the can of worms I'm scared of opening. It's not saying that you guys are going to turn into a trailer park. So please don't think of our comments in that way. It's the long-term effects. I just want to make that just very clear, that I do appreciate you guys and all you do for our town.
Well, we appreciate that. My name is Chris Potts. I'm with J. Brown Professional Group, Director of Engineering. So I'm here to answer some of your questions that you brought up this evening. To go along with your comment about your concerns about other developments coming in, I'd just like to remind you that the RV park is a special exception. So any other developer that comes up, you can deny them. So you don't necessarily have to give an approval of another RV park coming into the city of Newberry if your concern is how it's being operated, the developer, all sorts of questions and concerns that you brought up. So really that power leads up to the board itself through the special exception process. So I'd first like to start with your comment about the 40% stays. The reasoning for that, as you can imagine, as board member Comrade brought up, is the sports tourism. The city of Newberry is lacking in rental residents for your sporting events during peak times. So increasing the 40% allows for, excuse me, families and ball players to come stay here in Newberry. A typical baseball team is in the upwards of 20 players per team. So if you can think of it that way, I mean, the family, both parents come with one kid, they need a place to stay. I mean, plus you have, how many games playing during the week and all those teams. So the idea is that we want to provide a hotel stay to support the economy with the 40% stay. So that's the reasoning behind that. It's not that they want to have permanent residents. They want to support the tourism component of the city of Newberry. So that is the main reason for the 40%. Because I know city of Newberry always has tried to attract a hotel. And for whatever reason, hotels feel like the demand won't be there, which is the reason why it transitions into the snowbird aspect of extending the stay. I mean, sports tourism is only a finite part of the year. So to keep the business moving and being able just to have enough revenue to operate the park, you've got to fill in the off times for the years. And I know that some of the board members mentioned the stay of snowbirds. A lot of snowbirds are starting to leave around October and coming back to move back up north around April or May. So in essence, it is a 9 to 10 month period that snowbirds are coming down. Even though the weather may not be snowing, it just depends on where you are in the country. Because winter and fall, as soon as October, November hits, can last all the way till May, depending on where you're at in the country. I understand that the city of Newberry is wanting their vision to be sports tourism, but you got to remember that there's, that only boosts your economy for that certain period of time frame. Snowbirds will come in and boost the economy for the time that sports tourism goes away. And they do infuse the economy. a perfect example is Alachua County and the city of Gainesville. Students typically drop during the summer and then they come back in fall and spring. It's kind of the same essence as snowbirds. I mean, the economy around city of Gainesville and Alachua County dips during the summertime when most of the students go away. Students don't pay taxes either. So they come in hotels, apartment complexes. So those commercial aspects, property taxes from them boost the economy. They will pay water and sewer. The RV park will pay for water and sewer. There won't be individual meters for each RV site. So they aren't a true resident. So they won't have a billing address. So the RV park will support the city in that aspect of utilities. But the residents, we've looked at market research, and big name commercial developments to infuse in the Newberry just feel like there's not enough local residents to support growing commercial developments. Whether it's a Publix or a Walgreens or just, the local commercial aspects that you see throughout other cities. But having something like the RV park plus all the residential development that's coming up will help bring those sort of uses to the city of Newberry. It's kind of a chicken and the egg kind of situation where you have to have the demand for somebody else to come in. They won't come in anticipating demand coming. So you have to have the demand first, which this development will hopefully bring. And again, it is a high-end RV park. It's not a mobile home park. The stays will be monitored by the management company. And we're only asking for 90 days or 9 months. We're not asking for an unlimited stay like some of the board members have concerns with. And with that, they're not going to have the snowbirds are not going to come in for the school year, and they're not going to have kids that are going to enroll in school because they can't legally do that. So it's not going to have any sort of impact on your schools, but it will infuse the economy and give it a boost when they come down, because it always happens in the snowbirds. That's one reason why an area like the Villages is growing, because they have snowbirds come down, the economy gets infused, and they can continue development. I know Board Member Conrad, your concern was, what is the vision for the city of Newberry? When we took this special exception to the city commission, after we went through P&Z, we had some offline conversations with a lot of the board members to discuss long-term stays and park models and how they feel about it. And they were all in favor of it as well. So I think their vision is not necessarily specifically to sports tourism. It's to the economy of the city of Newberry, just to try to boost the economy to get new developments to it. So hopefully I answered most of the questions or comments.
Hey,
I
let's
know,
see.
Mayor, you had a question about the pricing. Fortunately, I can't answer that. That'll have to be.
Well, I don't want to hold your feet to the fire on specifics, but it seems to me like a lot of this conversation has we keep inserting the word trailer park in the conversation, and you guys keep saying luxury home. And I think a $15 to $20 million RV park development and what you've shown us, I see the luxury model. So I think a lot of these concerns are, this idea that it would somehow be cheaper to come and rent and stay in your RV park than it would be to rent a house. And I don't want to make you say, no, that I'm more expensive than that. I want to be sensitive to your pricing structure, but I would find a hard time believing that would actually be true to stay in a place that's getting cleaned every single day in a park model as cheaper than finding, a one-room model. I know that Gainesville is an expensive market. So can you give me a range that we're thinking about here, or is that we haven't gotten that far yet?
It will be equivalent to like a hotel stay.
A hotel stay.
A hotel stay. With the cleaning service. And so the price of staying in a hotel compared to renting an apartment, there's, significant difference. Basically staying in a hotel is 3 times a month compared to an apartment. And I'll let Dave come and answer that more.
And while Dave is coming down, because the other concern that I keep hearing is we're opening the floodgates here. And I guess that my reaction to that is that this city has directed staff for over a decade to bring an RV park to Newberry. And until now, we haven't been successful. And with our limitations in terms of having hook up to water and sewer, and the special exception, I think it's inordinately difficult. And I think you guys have pinpointed the problem that we've had is that our model is only really geared, our ordinance is only geared towards sports tourism, which is just not a big enough market if we are really serious about seeing this vision of an RV park come through. So can you give us a little bit about the pricing structure? And then I'd like the board to just talk about, have they won you over? If they haven't won you over, what could you recommend forward in terms of percentages and length of stay? Dave.
Thank you. Board members, I guess, are you Mr. Mayor right now? Thank you for allowing me to speak. Oh, I'm sorry, David McDaniel. I'm with M3 Development, and we are the developers and applicant on this LDR change. I'd actually like to address a question outside of the pricing. I'll get to that. My brothers have been watching and texting me information. So I have information from our market study from the woman up in Illinois who is one of the premier RV resort analysts. She's the cream of the crop. But I would like to address the question about whether this could end up deteriorating into something that we wouldn't be proud of, or anybody could do something that could deteriorate into something they weren't proud of. I've driven around, I've seen a lot of different RV parks. There are very, very nice RV parks where they park on grass. Some of them, they have electricity, but that's as far as it goes. And so we're not doing anything like that. Every single one of our spots will have electricity, water, sewer, hard paved roads. We will have hard surfaces for people to be able to exit their RV and put their chairs and little campsites or whatever they want to do. And all of those improvements are extraordinarily expensive. And there's just no way economically that you could justify doing those types of improvements that are in the current LDR and make money doing a schlocky, turn it into an annual junk rental. So, but I would like to address the question of rental rates. Again, this is from our market study from one of the national experts. We have $75 a day for the park models on the average. And for the park model. And then there could be monthly rates, but they still are in excess of a rental apartment. So no one would go rent that because it's cheaper. In fact, unless you don't have a hard time managing the difference between $1,400 or $1,500 a month for an apartment and spending $2,000 or $3,000 a month for an apartment. Maybe if you don't notice the difference, then maybe there is no difference. But I'd also like to address something that it's one of my own personal hot buttons, and that is when people misrepresent what's being said. And like when I got pretty hot at the first P&Z when everybody kept talking about the trailer park. We're going to have a trailer park. We've never said we're going to build a trailer park, and it was very offensive to find that. We've never said an unlimited stay. We're talking about 9 months. 9 months, not unlimited. We're talking about 40% park model. We're not talking about 50% park models. So with all due respect to the board, I would appreciate it if you would give us the respect of responding to what we're asking for without politicizing it and turning it into something that's not fair or honest. So, excuse me. So with regard to what we're doing and what anyone could do in the future, I can tell you the opportunity was created because we started working on Avalon Woods, and we put in a lift station that provided sewer to the property across the street that was zoned agriculture. That is the only reason that site became available for an RV park. For someone to find another ag site, or more difficult, a commercial site, a 95-acre commercial site that they could affordably buy and still have water and sewer, it is cost prohibitive for anyone to go in and build another one of these developments unless you guys choose to let it happen. But believe me, it's very, very expensive. And the other thing that this is, again, sort of a side note, it's not really relevant or germane to the city, but we've discovered that there's actually no financing to develop these things. You can't go to a bank and borrow money to build one of these without personally guaranteeing every nickel. So we're raising all the money like we always do. We never go to banks, but I want you to know that that is going to be a headwind for anyone who wants to do something that is of a low quality. So my request today, and the reason for the 9 months is to give us flexibility. The point in having a cap to the length of stay has exclusively to do with it not turning into a permanent resident, right? That's what everybody's worried about. And frankly, I don't blame you. It's a legitimate concern. But I can tell you that when code enforcement starts noticing clotheslines in front of the park models, you got a problem. But believe me, in our deal, that will never happen. So I'm making being a little sarcastic, but the fact of the matter is that whether it's 3 months or 9 months, the real concern is still remedied. And that is that the 9-month stay will still stop people from living there permanently. With regard to the percentage of park models, the main point for us is that we feel that is going to be a great alternative to people driving into Gainesville for hotels. That's really what we're trying to do. There may well be, like our market analysts have said, oh, there could be some traveling nurses who may want to come and stay for 2 or 3 months. Okay, that could be. That's not going to be our business. Our business is going to be people coming to stay here for a relatively short period of time. And it is true that the typical family doesn't stay much longer than maybe a month at the most. But why would you limit us if we're not hurting the community by having a longer stay? I can't imagine a single reason why that would harm the city. All it would do is potentially harm me on the back end of my business. So that's why I'm here. I appreciate you all hearing me out. I would very much appreciate a yes vote to this amendment to the LGRs.
Thanks, sir.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm sorry. You
absolutely.
have questions for me?
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you'll stay
Absolutely.
there. And board members have any questions for Dave? Naeem, were you reaching, or was that what you asked? Bill?
Yeah, appreciate what you say, and I apologize for any for being offensive in shooting low, and I think you do. I've seen your other subdivisions you do in Newberry, and I've talked to Mike about how well you work with the city, and you have been one of our premier developers. So I don't
appreciate that a lot.
any ill will. I had more in mind that if we change the LDRs, I've seen some RV parks that are very low rent. My wife and I were full-time RVers for a couple of years, and we would look at the RV catalog. This is before cell phones, so it's a while ago. But if it said 9 months rental, we wouldn't stay there because you would have migrant people that are camping out there, and if you're staying for 9 months, you stay longer easily. But I trust that with the amount of money you're going to invest, you're not going to attract that kind of thing. But we're changing the LDRs for you, so somebody else could take advantage of the same thing. That's what I was shooting for. No disrespect for
I appreciate
the quality work you do.
If I can address though, the standards for development are much higher than anything that I don't see any way in which we can do all of the hard roads, all of the improvements, all of the water line, sewer line, electrical connections, and still allow even someone who, and of course, in our development, we'll also require if someone's got an RV at a certain age, they're gonna have to send us a picture of it so that we know that it's nice. But the
Okay.
answer is I think that the rest of the LDRs more than adequately cover the concern about cost, about the quality of the product.
And I agree, and my mind has kind of been changed and listened to the discussion. The fact that you gotta hook up to water and sewer is gonna drive off anybody that wants to come in with a low cost thing. So
Yeah.
I'm satisfied about that. My one remaining issue is the amount of taxes you're gonna pay, which is what we get to run our city.
Yeah.
You're gonna bring, if you're successful, and I hope you are, you can bring a lot of people to our city that are staying for fairly permanent, even though there's a steady turnover, we're gonna have to be serving these people with ambulances and code enforcement and all those kind of things. What, do you have any idea? I'm sure you've done some planning on what kind of taxes you're gonna be paying.
Well-
'Cause I've gotten various reports from different
Yeah.
people.
Well, to be candid, we've made guesstimates based upon the cost of improvements. But as you probably know, there's a couple of different ways in which ad valorem taxes are calculated. Some of it is based upon the cost of the improvements, but then some of it is based upon your revenue streams. And these developments produce pretty good revenue streams. And so I hesitate. Our current expectation is that we should have somewhere around, I've told others, this is not secret, our expectation, we're going to be spending about $15 million to build this resort. And what percentage of that can be called real estate, like versus other things, I can't say. But I would suggest that it will probably start at 15 million and probably go up from there once the revenue, because again, they'll come back and ask the question, what are the revenue streams and that sort of thing. But I'm surprised to hear that there were old ones that were, excuse me, I just got a text. I might have an answer to that question. So our projections are 150,000 a year in property taxes.
Okay, and 150,000 a year, so that's probably the amount we would get.
It's 25% of what we get from
1,000,
Argos.
A little less than 1,000, that'd be like 150 residential units. Which on that same land, if you developed it as a residential subdivision, which I think would be your alternative, if we don't give you what you want, you'll probably turn around and make it a residential subdivision.
Probably
right?
would.
So
If the school board will let us.
we would get, 3 or 4 times that much for property tax. And my other concern was a lot of the taxes you'll pay if you rent it day by day will be like the hotel tax, the hotel bed tax, which we don't get any of that. That all goes to the county. And so it would divert, if it was a subdivision, we'd get our millage out of it. But if it's all going to hotel bed tax, and
Well,
it doesn't go through Newberry.
It is true. I mean, but the current property taxes on that property are about 3,000, I think is what we.
It's just ag, yeah.
Yeah.
Ag doesn't pay
And,
anything. But I mean, our hope is it's gonna develop into something because it's
Yeah.
right across from Avalon.
Yeah, and we
Subdivision.
know how to do subdivisions. We figured that out. But the housing is going to happen in Newberry anyway. This is just going to be something on top of what's already happening, not in place of. So our feeling, my response to that, and it is a legitimate question, but I feel pretty confident that the housing will happen somewhere else if it doesn't happen here, and we'll end up with more people coming and visiting. The complaints about not having sufficient retail in this town are primarily rooted in a lack of the population, and that's what we're bringing. So I feel confident that this would be on top of what's already happening, not in place of something that's happening.
But would you agree with me that if we didn't give you what you need here, then you would probably turn to residential.
Well, we might turn to
And,
that. Yeah.
We would get more taxes from that.
Yeah,
So that's-
But I think we can have both.
Yeah.
I think we can.
But
have
I mean, there's an added benefit is that we get some diversity in
Yeah.
housing and people that retired people that would spend money in different places and there would be
And-
some benefit.
And
there.
let me be clear, we certainly reference the snowbirds, and that is definitely going to be an element of our market, but we really are planning on primarily focusing on families. The bulk of what's going to be our driver is going to be the activities happening in Newberry plus the other tourist activities in this region. So like Jenny Springs, for example. I didn't know this before, but they get 1 million visitors a year. Some of those people are going to stay at our RV resort. Maybe not a lot necessarily, but it's going to be a part of the business. The longer term stay is just simply to provide the flexibility that gives us the ability to not lose some tenants, which we don't know what to expect and who they're going to be. And it's more a matter of being most flexible as we can be. And candidly, if this turns out well, which there are developers who are doing RV resorts all over the state of Florida, and we've been keeping an eye on the new things going on. I wouldn't be surprised if the ad valorem revenues are higher than 150 once this thing gets going. I would not be at all surprised. So
another concern I had is that, we initially approved you because we thought it went hand in hand with our sports tourism thing.
Yeah.
But as you fill this park up with park models and long-term leases, it becomes less available for our short-term weekend tournaments. And when we have a tournament with 64 teams, and you mentioned 20 kids on a team, plus about 2 family members, that we buy every hotel room in the city of Gainesville. We need like 1,000 beds, which is just right below what there is available in Gainesville.
again,
So you're not going to be
our
able to help us
managers,
out much
no,
with
no,
sports tourism.
our managers understand that where the real money is in these businesses is short-term stay. And we will certainly leave open what's necessary, anticipating the events that are coming.
Well, I mean, you won't be able to cover our tournament, even one.
Oh, no,
baseball
no, no,
tournament.
no.
You'll be able to cover.
I mean,
a
if we
small
end up,
percentage
if,
of it.
again, it all comes back to how, if phase 1 works great, we can build phase 2. And if phase 1 and 2 work out great, we'll build phase 3. So we have the potential of expanding to up to 850 units, as you know. We're just simply, again, responding to wanting to have some flexibility. But believe me, we will keep the spots open. The other group that's going to be a big user will be during football games. And we're not going to run people off who are already staying there, but we certainly are going to keep places, keep the rents up so that there's more spots available for those people to serve them.
Yeah.
So that's a manager thing. I'm not personally familiar with how exactly they do that, but I imagine that the hotels start raising the rates as soon as they get close to football season and graduations and all sorts of other things. And our management group was part of the team that put together Marriott's reservation program. Their algorithms for their room rates, and they've now applied that to the RV business.
And one final question. If we reduced it to 180 days, would that be a knockout factor for you, or could you live with that? Because apparently there's the lawyer is going to get back with us and say that there's some difference between 6 months and more than 6 months as far as transient.
I mean, I wouldn't spit in your eye over it. No, I wouldn't object terribly, but I guess I would just ask, what real benefit is it to do that? Like what will the city lose if you give us that flexibility?
I don't know that, but I think Mr. Maltby is going to tell us because he's read the law about what's the magic number about 6 months.
Hang on one second, Rich, because we've got a couple board members that have been waiting patiently to ask their questions. So just hold on to that question and let Naeem, you got the floor.
Okay. So just to, I'll put it out there where I stand. I'll put it out there where I stand. once again, I really want you to know where I'm coming from. As a developer, I think what you do with the city, you're one of our premier developers that we love to work with. I mean, you are amazing, and this is not a reflection on what you're asking. It's more of potential. So my thing comes to, I'm in agreement with this whole 40% increase because I do see the huge potential this can have in our sports industry. Yes, the snowbirds, but I coach rec ball. I see what happens in Champions Park. I see the archery in Easton when I'm there coaching. So I do see a great potential. Also, I have family that does not live here that hates to stay at the Residence Inn or the Druil in Gainesville and have to lug 15, 20 miles just to come hang out with their granddaughter. So this would be huge to go from 10% to 40%. And I'm okay with that. I want to go back to what Conrad said was, I understand your point on the 9 months. It's like, I know you wouldn't spin in our eyes if we asked for 6 months. You know, is there some, you know, give and take here available on this? And if there's not, my question is directed to staff on, is this going to be considered a special exception that was mentioned? Can we not have it changed in the LDRs and have a special exception for this particular group developing this RV park, that they are completely inclusive to this?
Right.
Mr. Chair, yeah, this was addressed actually at the special exception hearing. This is not something that could be added to the special exception because it's specific in the LDRs. And so it requires a change to the LDRs to allow that to happen.
Okay. So my concern now with the 9 months is, can the clock start over again? Like they're living in this park model. They decide to stay 9 months. They have some money and they're like, you know what? I want to stay in Newberry. Can you guys be like, yeah, don't worry. We'll check you out today, check you back in, and here comes another 9 months on the clock. Is there something as a checks and balance that you have in place for that?
Again, I think what we're concerned about here is that the resort devolves into a flop house, so to speak, you know, like the old house that gets cut up into multiple rooms and it turns into, you know, a drug house or whatever. And so I'm willing to address the real concerns, which is we don't want this to become something that's bad to for the neighborhood. This is a little, again, anecdotal, but it's sort of a point. My brother-in-law works for a big apartment construction company, and he's got a guy who's one of his colleagues, and this guy lives in an RV, and he's renting an RV spot in Jacksonville because he's building an apartment in Jacksonville. It happens to be a $350,000 RV, and he's paying $800 a month, and he's going to live there for 2.5 years. I don't think that's what you guys want to stop, right? I mean, I'm not suggesting I want a 2.5-year stay. I'm just saying you certainly wouldn't want to refuse a professional, high-paid salary person from living in your neighborhood. So if what we really, to me, again, maybe I'm missing something, but from my standpoint, what we really want to avoid is this thing becoming a long-term, people moving in, setting up the clotheslines, building the front porch on the front of their RV. That's the stuff we're trying to avoid. But if what we're trying to avoid is that, then what are the things that what are we stopping? Like, what would we be stopping if some Canadian, they came to Florida, they drove down in November and they pulled in and they were like, gee, honey, we're just having such a delightful time. We'd like to stay for another couple of months at the end of the 6-month stay or the 3 months, whatever the time frame is. They're in a $500,000 RV. How would that harm Newberry? And I think the answer is it wouldn't. And so with regard to issues of it devolving into or potentially setting a precedent for the potential of other things, I'm telling you, because I've studied the LDRs will prohibit anything being low quality because of the quality of the improvements that are necessary to be approved. And then again, furthermore along the lines, is it, you still, every one of these deals has to be a special exception. So the next RV resort that comes through the door is still a special exception. And you still have to say, look the developer in the eye, do you believe that he's going to do the right thing? And that's a question for you all to make. So I feel confident that this flexibility will be helpful to the development. It'll help give us more options, more freedom to provide a transient stay. I can tell you, my wife wouldn't consider 9 months permanent. My wife would consider 9 months to be a transient opportunity. That's a stop and we're moving on, because she likes to live in her house, and likes to be there for the long haul. So that's my expectation in this. I feel confident that whatever we produce will be something that the city will be proud of. And I don't think that by setting this up with 9 months length of stay will in any way harm the city through setting up, again, people staying too long.
Thank you, Dave. Rich, can you answer the question about the 6 month? Then we'll go to Board Member Johnson. And then I'd ask everyone it seems to me like we may have circled the wagon here a couple of times. And so maybe we need to start pushing our way towards a motion of some sort. So Rich, can you tell us if there's a legal question between 6 months or longer?
So my review of chapter 513, again, this is a state statute, but the definition of a transient guest, there's a rebuttable presumption
Some popcorn.
that if the guest is there longer than 6 months, they are non-transient. And the reason for that in that statute is because it avails the guest to the rights and procedures under Chapter 83 of the statutes, which is tenant landlord. So, obviously most states are very protective of tenants and make it, there's definitely a procedure in place that has to be followed in terms of notifying a tenant through an eviction scenario, and what kind of time frame a tenant has to react to that. And so basically what that statute is saying is that there is a rebuttable presumption that if the guest has been there longer than 6 months, then the operator needs to follow the process and the tenant landlord laws of the state of Florida. Rebuttable presumption in our world, the legal world, we see that come up in a number of different contexts, and it basically is a burden shifting provision that basically puts the burden on the operator to provide evidence, demonstrate to the court that this person was transient rather than non-transient, even though they'd lived there for more than 6 months. That's the battleground. So in my mind, even there in that chapter 513, it's basically saying it's still circumstantial. It's not definitive just because somebody has been there for longer than 6 months. That's the magic number, and all of a sudden they're non-transient. It's a fact, case by case evaluation. So I'm not sure if that is a direct connection to the issue that's in front of the board in terms of 9 months. It's maybe just more information that's what our legislature is looking at. Is for some reason, it doesn't say in the statute why, but they have pinpointed 6 months as a threshold that, again, is not definitive. It's not the end of the story, but it's something that they look at. So
okay, thank you, Rich. And before we go to Board Member Johnson, because I can see the wheels in Dave's head kind of turning on this, I would remind that the P&Z is advisory. We could say, well, let's advise 6 months and the 40%. That would buy a couple of weeks before this goes in front of the commission. The developer could research a little bit about that because he probably doesn't want to end up in that tenant situation either. And then we'd have more information on that point. You'd have a chance to look at that. And then the commission could decide whether or not they wanted to take that advice or not. Board Member Johnson.
Thank you. And Mr. McDaniel, to echo the folks that have spoken
We can't
already,
hear you, Gavin.
I'm muted in the room.
Still can't hear you. Hang on, we got you muted on our end. We
How's
still
that?
have you muted. Try one more time.
How's that?
Gotcha.
All right. So to echo the folks that have spoken already, Mr. McDaniel, this is, we appreciate how much energy and resources you've put into our city. And again, it's just a different ballgame. It's a different request. And part of my concern is that, you're giving us your word that you're going to develop and operate this business to its highest potential. And I have no doubt in that, based on the evidence of how you've performed so far. But in the hypothetical scenario that you sell the development or somehow you all exit and someone else comes in to operate it, this is our only chance right now to set standards to make sure that it's in line with how we want our city to grow. And so the concern is that, if one day in the future, it's a great investment for you now, you sell it, you all do well, you make a profit, but the person that comes in after you doesn't feel the same way that you do about its operation, by giving them more leniency on the front end right now, we're setting ourselves up for a potential problem. And the request and our process here is to make a recommendation based on evidence. And I think that the gentleman that presented before you gave us an example of some snowbirds traveling from October to May, with outliers being in October and May. And if you take those two outliers out, you're still at a 6-month maximum stay. The presentation that we got from staff in the beginning said that most folks only stay at these parks for a month. I don't know that we've seen any evidence that supports the need for something longer than that. And I think that having the option for folks to stay longer encourages a different type of tenant than my presumption was the goal of the tenant we were trying to attract whenever you started speaking about the project.
Okay. Gavin, was there anything in there that you wanted Dave to respond to, or I didn't hear a question, just a statement?
I guess just, I guess if he wants to respond with any evidence of why there should be a longer stay, I don't think we've heard that. I mean, I think from the longest that we've heard is 6 months, with maybe an outlier of October and May, which would bring us to 8 months. I don't see the need. And your argument that you wanted to support our sports tourism, folks aren't coming to Champions Park for 6 months. They're coming for a weekend. I just struggle to really see the need.
Okay, so I'll let Dave respond to that, but remember, this is not a quasi judicial. So our decision is not based on evidence. It's based on our willingness to compromise and work. We don't have the same evidentiary standards. I just want to make sure that the board members.
But I guess we're still making.
Well, I was just going to say that if you look at the letter from our consultant, I believe that it addresses the question. I think it's true that 9 months is an outlier. There's no question that that's true. And the common, we keep using the term snowbird, but people are using RVs now for all sorts of different things. People are able to work remotely and that sort of thing. So to answer or to address the question, 6 months is probably the more common transient stay for someone who might be coming down here to get out of the snow. But if that's what the board wants to limit it to, obviously it's within the board's prerogative to advise the commission to go with 6 months. At this point, since this is an advisory, I don't feel obligated to commit to what I'm willing to do, because I would like to see what the commission would like to see us do. And also I feel that that added flexibility could, very often businesses live on a very small percentage of additional business. They have the core business, and then it's that extra stuff that makes it all really work well. And so I just would rather not lose that opportunity. So that's how I would respond to that. I agreed. The bulk of our business is going to be short-term stays. That's the
Okay.
fact. That's where our real money is going to be made. But to cut out the ability to have people stay longer, to me, doesn't seem to be something that is, although I have to admit, I'm looking forward to addressing that question of the 6-month tenancy with our attorney and find out what the rules are and the laws are in that regard.
Okay, I'm not trying to cut off the conversation, but it seems like everyone has had an adequate opportunity to express their concerns. And it appears to me anyway, that we're kind of treading over the same ground now, perhaps for the second or third time. My last thought is that I've been asking myself the question that you asked, what is the harm? And I can't think an answer to what is the harm between the 6th and the 7th month. And to your associate, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting your name, sir. You mentioned that the commission did discuss this. It came up in the Board of Adjustment meeting. I'm getting my nights mixed up. Came up at the Board of Adjustment meeting because if you recall, we had a lengthy conversation when we were in quasi judicial about accepting the special exception. And we ended up spending a lot of time that night talking about these two issues, which was not on the table in front of us that night. So we were having a conversation about quasi judicial with the commission on the same thing. And all of the commissioners present unanimously supported the 270 and the 40%. So obviously the P&Z, you guys are welcome and free, and we ask you to give your own thoughts and your own advice. But since Mayor Conrad had asked about where the commission is on this, we've actually had a public conversation, and they appreciate the diversity. They appreciate everything that you're bringing to the table. You're bringing a $15 to $20 million development, and you're asking for the flexibility of a longer stay and a higher percentage of a different type of diversity of home. To me, those seem like a reasonable request for what you're doing for the community. So is anyone ready to make a motion so that we have two other potentially lengthy conversations tonight as well? Bill?
I'm willing to move that we approve the ordinance as written with the additional comment that I would like staff to bring back to the commission the tax revenue that can be expected from this compared to other tax revenues. And maybe some, well, that's it. That's the only other recommendation. And if anybody else has any recommendations you want to put on, I'll make that part of the motion too.
Okay, so I have a motion to accept the ordinances written by staff with a request for more information about the taxable revenue that's going to come. Do I hear a second to that motion? So the motion was made by member Conrad, the second was given by member Urchin. Any conversation, questions from the board on the motion on the floor? It was 270 is what's written from staff. Okay. Any questions or comments on the motion on the floor from the board? Seeing none, we'll go to public comment. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our conversation on item 2 on tonight's P&Z agenda. This is the item discussing recreational vehicle parks, increasing maximum allowable park number models, and longer stays. You've listened to a long conversation here tonight, so hopefully you stuck with us through the whole thing. If you'd like to call in and make a comment, now's the perfect time to do so. You can accomplish that by dialing the phone number on your screen. Once you're in the meeting, look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little hand symbol. Quickly click that hand symbol. That'll let us know you'd like to address the board. We'll make sure you have the opportunity to do so. We're going to begin with live comment, and then we'll move to virtual comment. Do we have anyone live in the chamber who'd like to address the board? Seeing none. Any virtual hands raised? Seeing none, we'll go for a roll call vote. We'll start with the maker of the motion. Bill? Aye. Jessica?
No.
Naeem? Miss Linda?
Aye.
Mr. Gavin?
No.
Motion passes 3-2 with member Johnson and Miss Jessica in dissent. That will take us to item 3 on tonight's published agenda. Before we move to item 3, can we take a 2-minute comfort break before we get into other agenda items, lengthy comments? All right, board members, if you could begin to make your way back to the dais. Who are we missing? We got. Is Gavin and Linda still on Zoom or did we lose them? There's Gavin. There's Linda.
I'm here.
30 seconds. 30 seconds. Yeah. While, are we back live again, Janine? Okay. While we were taking a break, we have some issues with our agenda. And there's been a request to move item 3 to item 5 and item 5 to item 3. I think I can deal with a head nod if no one has a problem with that. We're still these same 3 items. We're just switching 3 and 5 around. We have some, okay. All right, then we will move to item 5, ladies and gentlemen, which just became item 3. So we're going to talk about the creation of a city ordinance regulating food trucks. I understand that we have some food truck operators online, and I have kept up somewhat with the community's chatter and conversation about food trucks. So I hope that there are a lot of people watching tonight, because most of what has been said on social media has not been quite accurate. And Brian, are you leading us through the food trucks? Okay. So, and while Brian is finding where he should be, my memory of our first conversation is that by state law, we are not allowed to outlaw food trucks. We're not allowed to say they can't be here. We are really only allowed to say how they can exist here. In my capacity as your liaison between the P&Z and the commission, I will let you know that the premier concern of the commission is that if there is unfettered access to food trucks, that inordinately hurts our restaurant industry. Because why would I ever spend $250,000, $500,000 to build a restaurant if all I have to do is spend $15,000 on a food truck and I can operate? Some of the food trucks that we have actually park next to our restaurants so they can go into the restaurants and use the bathroom facilities while they're sitting there. To Member Conrad's concern that he's brought up, when we think about food trucks, these are entities that don't pay property taxes. So when we think about their inclusion in the city, there's not a big price tag that goes with it. I look at food trucks more as a cultural diversity, as a nice attribute, a service to our city that our residents certainly enjoy, I enjoy, but they're not providing much in the way of taxable revenue to the city of Newberry. So that's a 40-second summary of what was about an hour and a half conversation between the commission when we first looked at this. So with that, Brian, have you found your place?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
I talked just long enough. Take it away.
As Mr. Chair said, this is a draft ordinance that will regulate the operation of food trucks within the city of Newberry. Recently, the state legislature passed Senate Bill 1193, named deregulation of professions and occupations. But the long and the short of it was, it basically said that the cities can't outlaw food trucks in their entirety, but they can regulate where they operate within the city, how they operate within the city. And so that's what this ordinance is basically trying to do, is set out the guidelines that encourage food truck operation, but provide limits on that operation, reasonable limits. And so one of the things that the bill did, that you can no longer charge additional fees or charges to food trucks. Previously, actually currently, and we're in the process of changing it, this would change it. The city of Newberry required food trucks to get what's called a mobile vendor license. And it's a local business tax and then another fee on top of that. So this ordinance is going to remove that additional requirement. They would only be required to have a standard business tax receipt like any other business in the city. And so moving on. We already talked about that. You can't prohibit them from operating in the entirety of the city. You have to provide some means for them to operate legally. And so, let's see, mobile food dispensing vehicle is basically any self-propelled or movable food dispensing unit that includes its self-contained utilities. And so it has its own utilities in terms of gas or water or electricity or liquid waste disposal tanks. Again, it's just going over the actual statute. Municipality, county, or other local government cannot require a separate license. And so as described, this would take out that requirement, the proposed draft ordinance. And it cannot be construed to affect the municipalities or counties, government entities' authority to regulate the operation. So that's just getting through the statutory changes. The food trucks themselves, in terms of health standards and those kind of issues, are regulated by the state, not by the local government. They have to obtain an annual license and they get inspected by the state and the health department. These are various steps that they would have to go through: getting a kitchen plan approved, apply for the license and pay the fees to the state, licensing inspection. And so all of the other regulations pertaining to the operation of food trucks go back to the local jurisdiction. So for example, you can require the business tax receipt, as we mentioned, which this proposes to continue to do. Which zoning districts that food trucks can operate in. You can regulate the hours of operation and the frequency in terms of number of consecutive days they can operate. You can limit the amount of noise generated by a food truck, what kind of signage that they can use on site, and waste collection requirements in terms of having receptacles available on site. And you can have this city can regulate the parking requirements and whether or not they're allowed to operate within city right or municipal right of way. And so the draft ordinance, establishes the intent and provides definitions, specifies the city business tax is still required, just like any other business doing, operating in the city of Newberry. Authorizes the specific locations where they can be allowed to operate. Sets the conditions for land use and establishes operational standards. Establishes penalties for non-compliance through code enforcement. And so intent of the ordinance is to allow the legal operation of food trucks in the city. None of this is intended to prohibit that. We actually want to encourage food truck operators. We just want to do it within a reasonable set of guidelines. Establishes the intent to comply with state statutes. Again, stating that we're not in opposition to the state statutes. Basically defines what a mobile food vending unit is, what's meant by an accessory use, what is meant by a developed site, and what's considered a special event. Again, the city business tax receipt is going to be required, just as always. It eliminates the mobile vendor license addition on top of that. Authorizes specific locations. The draft ordinance basically proposes that food trucks would be allowed to operate in all commercial and industrial zoning districts throughout the city. On city property, including right-of-way, it would have to be as part of a lawfully permitted special event. You wouldn't be able to just set up in the right-of-way any day of the week. It would have to be a special event where maybe the streets close down or something like that. On private property, as part of a lawfully permitted, if a permit is required, special event. And then in common areas of residential subdivisions, limited to 4 events per quarter. This is, for instance, if you have a common area, you have a clubhouse area or some kind of open area where it would be appropriate for the food truck to pull over on the side and then have the neighborhood residents come in. It could be, they could schedule those from once a month, basically. you don't want to set up a perpetual food truck location within the neighborhoods, but you want to provide some flexibility to allow them to go into the neighborhoods occasionally. And then, at private gatherings, of course, a lot of times they'll use food trucks as a caterer for private events. And so that of course would be allowed and held on private property. If there's no special event permit required, then they'd be allowed to operate just without any kind of additional permitting as well. Okay, so sets the conditions for land use, establishing the operational standards. Oh, I don't know. There we go. We're back. One of the requirements, and this was actually discussed at length with the city commission when we were in the discussion phase. The draft ordinance does have a provision that says that they have to have an affidavit from the owner granting permission. And that was basically because when you're doing a code enforcement action, if you're not the property owner, the ultimate responsible party is always the property owner. And so if the property owner hasn't agreed to allow the food truck to operate on their property and the food truck is in violation, and you can't enforce it against the food truck, you have to have the option of being able to enforce it against the owner of the property that they're operating on. And so by requiring that they have an affidavit from the owner granting them permission, the owner is also basically agreeing to shared responsibility for any code violations. Property owner agrees to keep the food truck area clean. Again, that's sort of ultimate responsibility. It's really the responsibility of the food truck operator, and it'd be between them and the owner of the property, but the ultimate responsibility falls on the property owner. Property must be developed site. This would eliminate the ability for food trucks to operate just on vacant lots, which we've had some issues with in the past. And then basically one food truck per site, unless you're having a special event. If there's a special event, you could have multiple food trucks as part of the special event. And allowing them to operate at a single location 4 days per week, no more than 3 consecutive days. The concept here goes back to being fair to the existing brick and mortar restaurants in terms of, if you have a food truck that's allowed to just set up day in every day without limitation, then you're in direct competition with the brick and mortar restaurants that are open every day as well. And this requires them to basically keep moving around a bit. And then hours of operation, 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Okay, and so when operating on commercial and private property, have to obtain the supplemental site plan approval from the LDR administrator. And this is basically just to ensure that the placement of the food truck on the already developed site is not going to create a traffic or pedestrian issue by blocking sidewalks or by blocking necessary ingress and egress pathways for vehicular traffic. That's basically the gist of it, and it would be a simple process that they just provide a sketch, and the LDR administrator would review it and then either approve it or suggest alterations that would make it a safer layout. Does have to be on a paved surface, as you mentioned, no vacant lots, no dirt lots. Can't impede the flow of pedestrian vehicular traffic, it's kind of obvious. Again, this is another issue that goes back to the fairness with the brick and mortar businesses, not allowing them to establish picnic tables and permanent seating areas for the rest of the patrons who come up, order their food and then take it with them and leave, not stay and eat on site, unless it's part, again, of a special event. No drive up or drive through sales in terms of just pulling up and then passing through, or driving, having an actual established mobile drive through. This is one that's also caused some consternation with previous food truck vendors in the city, which is the requirement to remove the truck daily unless allowed during a multi-day special event. You know, on-site storage would have to be an enclosed garage or on property zone for open storage. And then no alcohol sales, again, unless approved as part of a special event. And again, you know, food trucks can't interfere with traffic or block buildings, fire hydrants, et cetera. You know, kind of a common sense addition, but one that's important to include. So in general, there would not be allowed parking on any parks or on playgrounds, sidewalks, bike lanes, any you know, municipal right of ways, unless it's part of an authorized special event. So if you had if you had an event where the right of way is closed down for a special event, maybe you close a street off and you have a big city party or some sort of thing like that, or you have West Fest over at Lois Fort Park, then it would be allowable to bring them in, and you might have some special accommodations where they can park over the sidewalk or something for that special event.
This is not talking about events. This is talking about single food truck operators who are trying to do this on a semi-consistent basis. If I come in, like we're going to talk about block parties in a minute, if I come in and want to hold an event, I go into a different ordinance and then I say, yes, I'm going to have multiple things that are happening as part of this one special exception for this event. This is primarily talking about, so my memory, and I'm forgetful about how we ended up having this conversation on the commission before we had it on the P&Z, that when we think about multiple food trucks in this ordinance, the idea is just a food truck rally, not necessarily, you know, connected to a festival or West Fest or those kind of things. Those things would fall into a different category. Is that fair, or am I missing something?
Yeah, Mr. That's generally correct. And so this just outlines that they in general can't just accumulate in an area without having the like you say, a food truck rally special event set up and ready for that, which could be a standing event or it could be an individual one-off event. You know, signage is limited to the signage that's on the vehicle itself. You know, no amplified music or noise to attract attention. So you wouldn't be able to have blaring noise to gather attention.
I think it's probably better with this to jump in when you have them. So Bill, do you have a question?
Yeah. This actually, Mr. Chair, this doesn't pertain to that type of a vendor. That's actually considered like a canteen. It falls under a different set of state laws and all. This is for self-contained food vending vehicles. They're not preparing food. They're not preparing the food and that kind of thing. It's you know, they're just pulling it out of a freezer box as they go. So this actually would not cover that specific example.
So a couple of questions on, since we're bringing this up. I saw, I believe on the screen before, that picnic tables or some sort of setup is not allowed, like seating outside. If, like, for example, where Young's Kitchen used to be or where Tommy Knockers is currently set up, the place that he's renting currently has that already in place. That's something that would have to be moved because it doesn't belong to Tommy's or it doesn't belong to whoever's renting that area. Is that something that now he's in violation or they would be in violation?
Mr. Chair, it would be violation, and actually, to my knowledge, Young set up picnic tables and Tommy Knocker set up picnic tables. That wasn't part of the, that wasn't already there.
Okay, I didn't
And
know.
so,
I just saw
yeah.
it there. That's why I asked. So
Yeah, but it would be a violation just because you know, the ordinance prevents them setting up with essentially a de facto permanent restaurant, and providing regular seating like that would be part of that.
okay, and then my second question is, to the signage limited to the signage on the food truck? Is that temporary signage as well? Can he just hang like food here, and then he takes it with him every day. It's not like a permanent, like how they had it on the 4x4s and they put the sign up and it stayed there. Talking about like temporary.
Our city ordinance doesn't actually allow what they call snipe signs, which are those little, yard type signs that you stick out everywhere in the right of way.
Well, you mean like the open house signs that realtors love to use?
That's one example, yes.
Okay.
So,
So the city doesn't allow that, but we have it everywhere. Oh,
when-
on the right of way.
in the right of way, correct.
Okay, I thought you meant
Yeah.
like they're not allowed, period. I'm like, wait a minute, I see them every
Oh,
all the time.
They're not allowed, period, but they generally are only picked up from the right of way. They're not picked up off private property.
So my question is the signage then, if they're on property, can they have a sign there saying, food or, Crave is here, or whatever?
According to the draft ordinance, what's in the draft ordinance right now, no, it would just be limited to the signage that's on the food truck itself.
Okay.
Brian, what about a menu? What if they've got a big permanent menu that's got cilantro tacos and then the menu down there? Does that fall as a menu or does that fall as a sign?
Mr. Mayor, I think that'd come out of a sign. I mean, excuse me, a menu, not signage.
And the purpose here is not to have food trucks that go and put 15 signs up and down the street.
Yes,
That's the idea of limiting that.
yes.
So my question is there a way that we can maybe make not an exception, but change the language a little bit in that aspect? That 'cause you're pretty much just saying that the food truck is the sign itself.
Mhm.
Can they have a sign and it takes it with them, like the menu or whatnot, that's not attached to the truck?
Under the current draft of the ordinance, they would not.
But you guys could recommend.
Yeah, can we
Take that out.
make a recommendation to at least amend that? And I'm not asking for permanent signage, I'm just asking that.
Right.
Help a couple of these people out that. might
Y'all can
have-
recommend anything you want.
All right, it doesn't mean it's gonna happen, but yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Sorry, thank you.
Hang on one second. And I would say on the signs, those signs are pretty expensive. And most of the people, when they put them out, they pick them up. The other folks, I get why we have a trouble with that. I think I see a hand on Miss Linda's screen. Miss Linda?
Yes, yes. Again, we're spending an awful lot of time on something like this, but basically,
We lost you, Miss Linda. I think you're frozen, actually. She said that we're spending an awful lot of time and then she froze. So we're gonna come back to Miss Linda. In the meantime, go ahead, Jessica.
So how would this, I'm gonna use like, what would be the difference between something like 2911 and Tommy Knockers for this ordinance?
Mr. Chair, I'm not familiar what 2911.
Because they don't have an actual food truck, they have a tent that comes out at some of these events and at the farmer's market at times. Would they be considered a mobile food truck or something else?
No, Mr. Chair, they wouldn't fall under this ordinance.
And my recollection with 2911, he only sets up at private properties like Joel's or at a particular event. It's not like
Well, just because like some of the recommendations for
Yeah.
him would be like,
can't have your sign. Yeah.
yeah, and paved surface. And so how does this affect like arepas, which is not on a paved surface and has outside seating and
Mr. Chair, Arepas is a kind of a unique situation in that they actually lease a brick and mortar structure and they just use the trailer as their kitchen. And so it falls
found a
under,
loophole.
basically, it is licensed as a food truck, but it's also, they've leased, the brick and mortar property. They have a kitchen area indoors as well with the required grease interceptor for washing dishes and that kind of thing. So it falls under a little bit. As I understand, the trailer is self-contained in the eyes of the state, and it's regulated still by the state as a mobile food vending unit, but it's in a permanent location where they've rented essentially the restaurant area. inside and outside.
Can I go back there? We got it back. Miss Linda, are you unfrozen? I can see you moving. Can
I
you?
guess I got frozen, didn't I? I guess. Anyway, my whole thing was we're just going over and over the same thing. But somewhere in here, somebody answered what I was going to say. When we have the fall festival or the watermelon festival or I don't know, football games and stuff of that sort, those would not fall under if the Melon Festival decided to have food trucks around, at their event. This would be a totally different issue. What we're talking about or concerned about is the people who are setting up just for lunch or for dinner and moving on or doing wherever they go. And our restaurants are complaining. The people who actually own brick and mortar buildings pay taxes and serve us.
employees.
They're the people that are upset about it, right?
I would say that that's a fair consideration, although to be fair to our restaurants, I have not been contacted by any restaurant owner asking for us to handle it. I have had some snarky remarks made about, well, I wish I hadn't wasted $1 million building this restaurant in Newberry. I'd just bought a food truck. But I think it would be unfair for me to say that we're here on their behalf. We're here because the state has changed the law. And we need to now look at how we're going to respond to what the state has done. And we're trying to make sure that we have all the considerations for all parties considered, because we certainly have a lot of residents who enjoy food trucks. But we also want to, restaurants and businesses do, expect us to protect their interests as well.
So basically, are you there?
Gavin, you have your hand up? I'm sorry, Miss Linda, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, but okay, but basically, what we're here for is to tell Brian Thomas or Wendy or whoever that has the codes and has the directions for the state that we will send this on to the BOA and they will decide how to handle it.
Correct.
Then let's get a motion.
Let me go to Gavin and get his comments.
I only have two quick questions. The first is I'm a little unsure about the language in our packet. It's on page 98. It's at the top, number 4. And it's talking about food trucks operating in single family or multifamily residential use properties, unless they're operating in the common area of a residential project. And that could be a clubhouse. It could be, you could define a common area pretty generally for a residential project. Is it something that we want to permit, that a food truck without the permission of the neighborhood can show up and start selling food? To me, that's a kind of a area of privacy. It's not a commercial area that residents of that neighborhood may assume that a food truck can come in and attract people that don't live in the neighborhood to come into their neighborhood to buy food.
Mr. Chair, this would not give them the right to do so. This would be at the invitation of the homeowners association or whoever the owner of that property is. It's still private property and subject to private property rights. So they would have to have permission. They'd have to have been invited in.
Okay, I'm trying to think of examples of neighborhoods that we have that may not have HOAs, but have an area that you could define as common space that the food truck could interpret that that's their right to be there.
No, it's the other way around. So the food truck, if the neighborhood has a common area and the HOA of that neighborhood invites a food truck and organizes and sets it up, then the food truck can come in, but they can't come in by right and just set up in a common area without an invitation. They have to partner. So it'd be like partnering with one of the existing business. So if Joel's Coffee House wants to have something, then a food
some of
truck
our
can go and
neighborhoods
partner
don't
with
have
them.
HOAs, I
A food truck
believe.
can go and partner with Newberry Place. And this really is predicated. We've got 2 or 3 neighborhoods that have kind of come up with a weekend every month that they invite a different food truck in. Newberry Place has a really nice common area that's easy to do that. The other ones are a little bit more problematic, but we wanted to ensure that the food trucks had to work with a body inside the neighborhood.
But
So they have to work with it. They have to have the invitation. Is that language not clear? Is that your point, Gavin?
Well,
You don't think
there's
the
no
lang-
language in here that requires them to work with an HOA, and we do have some neighborhoods that don't have an HOA, but do have common space that the food truck could interpret this language that they have the right to just show up and operate without the permission of anyone of the neighborhood.
Okay, I have a city manager shaking his head no, and Brian not shaking his head at all.
Well-
Is that, can we tighten that language up? Why do we think that the language is going to prevent that partnership?
It says that you have to have the permission of the property owner. So whether it has an HOA or not.
Mike, can you speak into the microphone?
Mr. Mayor, my interpretation when I read this is that in all cases, the food truck has to have authorization of the property owner.
So any property owner inside the neighborhood could organize?
Well, if there is common space in a neighborhood, it is either owned by an association or the city.
Okay,
So if they're going to be on common space that is city dedicated property, it'd have to have authorization from us. And I think the ordinance speaks to you can't be on public property without express authorization of the city. So if it's common space that's not publicly owned, not the cities, then
it's owned by
an
somebody.
association or some private entity owns it, and that food truck would be required to have authorization from them.
Okay.
That's my understanding of the ordinance.
Gavin, does that address your concern?
It does. I mean, it's clear that you guys have spent time thinking about it. I interpret it a little differently. I don't see where it specifically requires association approval, but I understand.
What's that? Yeah, in all cases, to set up, you have to have the authorization of the property owner. Whether that's
Okay.
a commercial business that's allowing you to set up on their parking lot, or whether it's a homeowners association, or whether,
Okay.
as city manager mentioned, it's the property of the city. So
Because you have to have a signed and notarized affidavit from the property owner acknowledging the owner takes responsibility. Yeah. Page 98.
So page 98, it says you have to have a signed affidavit from the property owner and notarized from the property owner, which my memory of the commission, of the conversation on the commission is they thought that was too burdensome to have to go and find and notarize the, while we're letting that sink in, I have one question, and I only interjected at this point because it completely goes against staff's presentation. And I can't quite remember again why we got out of order and talked about this, but the commission seems to me, and I know Jessica, you watched this conversation. It seems to me they ended up just wanting to do a map overlay about 1 block deep up and down Newberry Road in 26, which was not what staff gave this basic presentation to the commission. And they went in a whole different direction. Let's just lay a map down. And so my question is, if that's where the commission is going, why are we back? Why aren't we, are you going to present that idea as well and say this is where the commission?
Actually, Mr. Chair, staff went back and watched the video of the presentation. That was a suggestion, but it never made it actually into the form of direction. It was decided that trying to maintain a map of where you can and can't go was basically, it was kind of that, who's going to be responsible for, verifying every single location against a map versus if it's available in a district, then
Right.
it's available in the district.
Huh, I thought I lost that argument. I'll have to go back and watch it too. All right. Go ahead, keep going. Unless, Jessica, we cut you off, and did you have questions or do you want to let him finish the presentation? All right. Go ahead, Brian. Are you done?
Just a few more points. They can't create nuisance conditions. Have to keep the area around the food truck clean, provide trash receptacles for guests. They can't discharge waste, fat, oil, grease, etc. from the vehicle. It has to be self-contained. It has to be carried off with them and disposed of off-site. Have to comply with various state and federal standards, of course. They have to carry copies of the state license on the food truck at all times. And then penalties, the food truck owner, and as stated, as a code enforcement action, it has to be the ultimate responsible party, has to be the property owner, who would be jointly liable for the code violations. The LDO administrator can revoke the supplemental site plan if in violation. Have to provide notice in a reasonable time to cure the violations, which the city of Newberry always does. If supplemental site plan approval or special event approval is revoked, then they have to wait a year to seek new approval. It's an ultimate penalty if they refuse to cooperate and remedy the violation. And then operation without authorization subjects the food truck and property owner to code enforcement action as stated. And so with that, staff report is complete, and staff does recommend approval of the draft ordinance to the city commission.
Okay, Dallas, do we still have food truck operators online waiting to talk? Okay. Okay. All right. I just want to let the board know, because sometimes we can hear from them and they have good ideas. Before we move to that, any more questions?
Just
Jessica?
So back to Gavin's point, because I agree that I misread this as well. The affidavit says it's on private commercial property.
Right.
Is that supposed to be private or commercial property?
As chair, a homeowners association owned property would be considered commercial as well.
Oh,
So,
okay.
and if it's city owned property, the prohibition of operating on city properties covers all of it.
Okay, any of the food truck operators that are listening to this conversation, if you would like to call in and give us some feedback as we let all of this sink in. This was a long conversation with the commission. It's a complex issue tonight. So we would like to hear from you. You can accomplish that by dialing the phone number on the screen. That would get you in the meeting. Once you're in the meeting, look at the bottom of the screen. You'll see a little hand symbol there. Click that hand symbol, and then we'd like to hear your comment. Again, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a motion on the floor. This is not open to the public at this point. If you're a food truck operator and there's something that our staff hasn't considered or something that you'd like us to consider, that's what we're looking for at this point. Once we hear from you guys, then we'll come back to the board to see if we can work our way towards a motion. Do we have any food truck operators that like to talk to us? No, they must like the conversation. All right. Board members, any more questions, comments? Are we working our way towards a motion? Oh. All right. Could you identify yourself, ma'am or sir?
Rachel, can you unmute yourself?
Okay. And give just a few more seconds to see if we can get the audio. Rachel, it's, if you can hear us, we cannot hear you. At the bottom.
Hello, can you hear us?
There we go. We got you.
Hi.
You have the floor.
Yeah, this is Doug Marsnick and Rachel Marsnick. We're with Mayflower Food Truck. And overall, I think, these guidelines are great. I don't know if you guys could see, I sent a little note during the session. Just three things I wanted to point out. The first one is on the discussion about the neighborhoods. And I think that's a well-warranted concern from the perspective of a food truck owner. I can tell you that, we're not going to go to a neighborhood like that and pop up without an invitation and without advertising. We get invited to a lot of neighborhoods during COVID, and we've learned the hard way that if a neighborhood is not on top of their advertising, we're not going to make any money, and it costs us more to go there than it does, So popping up isn't really an option for us. I understand that from your perspective, you do want to regulate that, and we're all for that. So just wanted to give you our perspective. The second thing, I hate redundancy, and the one item on there that I saw that was redundant is about the fire extinguisher. That's all part of our licensing and inspections systems. And so I know we've gone through this with High Springs, and with High Springs, they didn't put the forethought into it that you guys are. And basically half of their ordinances required us to be redundant and do things that we had already done during our inspection process. So if we can eliminate that, that saves everybody a lot of time. And then the third thing is on signage. I understand your concerns about, having a bunch of little signs out and left out on the right of way. I would say that we do invest a lot of money in like the flags and things like that kind of catch people's eye as they drive by. And it would be great if something like that, maybe even if it was just a little bit off the roadway, would be great, because we've found that those really do attract people's attention as they're driving by. And then I said only 3, but the fourth thing is I would like to say that we've worked closely with Mike and Jamie, and they have been very helpful and accommodating in setting up a municipal water and wastewater disposal for us, which has saved. We're a self-contained kitchen, but we are required to be attached to a municipal water source. And it has saved us a lot of headache and expense to be able to work with Newberry instead of with a kitchen somewhere else in town. So I just want to thank them for helping us set that up. That's
Thank
all.
you for those comments and for those kind words. And I would tend to echo his thoughts on the signage. I know we fight these signs all the time. I mean, they're everywhere. And I think most people don't know that we have an ordinance against them when they put them out. We have realtors put them out. We have the farmers market puts them out. I mean, but in my, besides for election cycles, when I lose and they're worthless to me, everyone else kind of has a vested economic incentive to go out and pick them up. I know the meat guy at the farmer's market left one sign, and he messaged me and said, "Hey, any chance you could pick that sign up for me? Because each one of them is 10, 15 bucks, and if you lose them, you've got to replace them because they are an eye catcher." I do also understand not wanting to have 50 up and down the streets, and I'm not quite sure what the balance there is for that. I think there's maybe an economic balance because they are expensive, and why would I, buy 50 of them when I really just need 2 or 3 in each direction to catch your eye? But that's pretty much my only thought towards what staff has recommended. Board members, we have another hand, Dallas? Who is?
Hi, this is Rachel.
Okay. Ms. Gray, we're hearing from food truck vendors. Are you a food truck vendor?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am. You have the floor.
Okay, awesome. So thank you, by the way. I just wanted to piggyback on what the gentleman said from Mayflower and the neighborhoods. We are very conscientious about not just popping up in a neighborhood that doesn't have an HOA. I live in one that doesn't have an HOA. A lot of things that you all may not be aware of, which may be good to know, is that they do invite us. And if there's no HOA, there are usually Facebook groups. And most of the time there are polls asking if we're wanted or what days are best. So we are very conscientious about that. Also, the signage, I don't have signage for my truck yet, but I have been wanting to get it just to get some attention when we are parked further off the road and it may be needed. So that would be good to be able to have that. And then the third thing is kind of a question that I wanted clarity on. My truck actually has a nice sound system on it, and the part about the no amplified sounds or whatever, I have the option to play music that I use sometimes, but not very loud just because it's hard to hear customers. But also we use it to call out names. So I would just want to make sure that if we use something like that, that we're not in violation.
I think that's a good clarification. I know I've visited a couple of food trucks recently that had some sort of amplified speaker to call out people's names. Usually both of those, I think, were at microbreweries where there was already music being played and they needed to be able to sort of get over the sound of the music to let you know your food was ready. Brian's engaged in separate conversation right now. I'm not sure he heard the question, but the question was if my truck has the ability to play some ambient music, and I'm primarily using it as a way to announce. I mean, it seems like that would be something that's more at a festival or food truck rally. If I'm just in a neighborhood, everyone is kind of waiting in a line there. Anyway, that
Right,
would that
yeah.
be prohibited?
Oh,
I think to the extent if the volume was such that it didn't cause complaints, nobody's really going to mind. It's the intent is to prevent really loud music to try to attract attention from farther away to the truck. It wouldn't be necessarily playing some light music around the truck. It's playing music loud enough that it gets outside attention and draw business in.
I mean, I would tend to think all of these rules are generally if people that abuse them and generate a complaint. So, okay, thank you, ma'am. We appreciate those comments. Bill?
I think it's pretty well written in there. It says amplified music or other sounds from any mobile food dispensing vehicle from an audio equipment installed or developed by the property owner or person in charge of the vehicle for the purposes of vending, attracting, or encouraging the congregation of current customers shall be prohibited. And it doesn't say anything about announcing the orders. So I think it's worded to satisfy Melissa's concern.
Okay, Jenny, do we have any other food truck vendors with their hand up? And Melissa, I didn't mean to cut you off. If you had another comment, we would certainly hear it now.
no, I'm all good. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I thought I heard. Melissa, can you tell us which truck you're with?
I'm the Crave Hot Dog and Barbecue.
Oh, I've heard a lot of good things about you. I crave to try you out. Thanks.
So back to like the whole redundancy thing, if we look at number 16, amplified music or sounds from any mobile food dispensing vehicle, and then we look at 18, the operation of mobile food truck dispensing vehicle should not create a nuisance condition. And then it says it right there, shouting or amplified music or sound. So it's like kind of like double on there. Yeah, and to some of these trucks' defense, they're calling out. You can't hear it unless you're actually there. Even when you drive by, you don't even hear the music until you actually park and get there. So I kind of feel like, for redundancy purposes, I mean, we do have a sound ordinance. If there's any way we can recommend, because I mean, poor lady has put speakers on her truck, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, she can't use them at all.
No, the way Mr. Chair, the way it's written is you can't use it to attract outside business. You can't use it as a form of advertising. It doesn't say that you can't use it to announce orders or you can't play a little bit of music.
I mean, I think when Bill read, I mean, I agree, it's written pretty well to say this is what we want to prevent. Can't use it as a loudspeaker, say, come and get it, come over here.
Carnival
And I think
barker.
you really just wanted to
Right,
say
okay.
arepas milko in a perfect Spanish accent. I think that's what that whole thing was, just to show off.
I'm Cuban, B. But yeah, with the whole temporary signage thing, that kind of just discourages me. I would like to see if there's some way we could maybe.
You want to put that in motion?
As a suggestion, it's not to remove the signage altogether, but to at least allow temporary signage where it must be removed by the food truck owner.
You want to put that in a motion?
Please.
So you move to adopt the ordinance as written with
Yes.
the one change of temporary signage is allowed that has to be removed with the food truck.
Correct.
Okay, I have a motion by Naeem. I have a second by Jessica. Are there questions, comments on the motion on the floor by the board members? Hearing none. Oh, Bill.
I would add one more thing. Take out item 17 on page 101. It says mobile food defend.
Oh, the
dispensing
fire
units.
extinguisher?
Yeah, we'll have the fire extinguisher approved by the fire department. What Mayflower said was that they have their own specifications required by the state.
Right.
Should be same as our fire department, but that's probably redundant. I don't mind taking that out if that's
Yeah.
okay with the maker of the motion.
Okay, maker of the
Yeah.
motion amends. Is the seconder of the motion still second? I still have a motion and a second to adopt the ordinance as it was written with 2 changes to allow temporary signage that has to leave with the food truck and to remove the redundancy of the fire extinguisher. Thank you. I was gonna say hydrant. Do you have any questions, comments on the motion on the floor from the board? Seeing none, we'll go to public comment. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of new item 3. We rearranged our agenda. This is the conversation on food trucks. If you've listened to the conversation, we have a motion, probably second on the floor, to accept the ordinance as staff has written with 2 additions. We're going to allow some temporary signage and we're going to take away the fire extinguisher because it is a redundancy. If you'd like to call in and have a comment on that conversation, now is the perfect time to do so. You can accomplish that by dialing the phone number on your screen. That'll get you in the meeting. Once you're in the meeting, look at the bottom of your screen, see a little hand symbol. Click that hand symbol, that'll let us know you'd like to address the board. We'll make sure you have the opportunity to do so. We're going to start with live comment, then we'll move to virtual comment. Do we have anyone live in the audience who'd like to comment on the motion on the floor? Seeing none, do we have any virtual comment? Seeing none, let's go back to Miss Linda. How do you vote?
Yay.
Gavin?
Aye.
Bill? Aye. Jessica?
Aye.
Naeem?
Aye.
Motion passed unanimously. Item 4 is still item 4. This is creating a city ordinance to allow for neighborhood block parties under specific conditions. I saw a hand. No. Ladies and gentlemen, this block party question has been an issue that we've seen for the past 2 or 3 years. So I just want to give a little bit of history on this. We were notified by Alachua County Sheriff's Office maybe 3 years ago, perhaps even 4, that there was a new and growing trend going on, at least in the state of Florida, if not more, of informal parties being advertised and hosted and just sort of crashing a neighborhood. So they utilize social media and they show up on a block at about 10, 11 o'clock at night. The music comes from people's vehicles. They block traffic. Ambulances, fire trucks, law enforcement have trouble getting through. Regular traffic has trouble getting through. If you have followed the news, there have been many of these that have resulted in violent situations where people have been shot. We've lost residents to this. And we want to make it clear what is the difference between a planned event, which we encourage. We love community activities that are safe, that do not block up roads or disturb neighborhoods, and these things. And we want to empower our law enforcement officers to be able to very clearly say what is allowed and what is not allowed, what is legal and what's not legal. So it's been a long process of a couple of years trying to draft up this ordinance and draw those very, very fine lines so that we can really clearly delineate to people when they say, well, why can the city of Newberry have West Fest, or why can Main Street have the Fall Festival, but we can't have a block party in our neighborhood? And that sounds like something that would be answerable by common sense. But when you get into the nitty gritty, there are some things we need to clarify. So that's kind of the history and the background of where of what this is. And with that, I'm going to ask Brian to take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate that. Actually, it saves me some time in going into the background. And so, as Bear said, this has been kind of an ongoing issue that staff's been looking at, and this ordinance is basically intended to allow legitimate block parties in neighborhoods sponsored by actual residents of the neighborhood to be able to hold those neighborhood block parties, small gatherings of people that are actual residents, and at the same time then prevent the large scale sort of neighborhood invasions that the quote unquote block parties tend to become. Again, staff was directed by the commission to draft an ordinance would allow for traditional neighborhood block parties, but prohibiting the large scale commercial events that other communities have experienced. So basically, this ordinance would allow for administrative authorization by special temporary use permit issued by the Land Development Regulation Administrator for a legitimate block party. It wouldn't, and by that what we mean is it would not require hearing before the Planning and Zoning Board. It wouldn't require hearing before the City Commission. It would be permissible at the staff level so that it didn't tie up board member and commission member time. Establishes the intent of the ordinance, obviously, provides for definitions within the ordinance, and then establishes the actual permit requirement. And then provides for specific locations where you can have an actual block party. And of course, sets time of day and duration standards, and defines what the prohibited activities in neighborhood block parties would be. So the intent, of course, is to provide regulation of actual legitimate block parties in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare. Definitions: a block party is a small-scale, short-duration event organized by the residents of the area, which requires the temporary closure of a city street. It's limited to 4 hours or less. Small scale means 200 persons or less, not intended to draw attendance from outside the area. A permit is required. We're not proposing that there be a extra fee for that. It requires a special temporary use permit obtained from the planning office, the LDR administrator. If no street closure is required, then the special temporary use permit would not be necessary. And so for even smaller scale events, just neighborhoods, residents getting together, but not intending to need to close the street down, they wouldn't have to have an STUP at all. So then allowable areas for block parties, any local street which can be safely closed. Local collector roads or roads carrying a lot of volume would not be eligible. You would not be able to have a block party on 235 or on Newberry Road, that kind of thing. And so we're talking about neighborhood streets, internal neighborhood streets. Time of day and duration: 9:30 a.m. to 11 p.m. Fridays and Saturdays, or 9 to 9 on weeknights. Limited duration means 4 hours or less extended. There might be extenuating circumstances. Again, the LDR administrator would have administrative authority to approve those on an individual basis. Prohibited events or activities, music noise that exceeds the city's noise ordinance. Charging admission or soliciting money to attend the block party. That's another one of the commercial aspects of these impromptu parties that we've seen advertised. Again, sale of alcoholic beverages. It's not to say that private individuals couldn't have alcoholic beverages at a block party, but if you're setting up sales, then it becomes a commercial endeavor. And events that are designed to draw the attendance from outside the general neighborhood. Again, that's not to say that you couldn't have a guest, but it's to avoid setting up a situation where the actual intent of the block party is to draw in large crowds from the outside that somehow pay attendance or buy alcohol or whatever. And with that, this completes the staff presentation, and we recommend approval of the draft ordinance. Thank you, City Commission.
Questions from the board? Jessica.
So I have a dumb question. It's really not, but it's one of those like Cobra effects that Mayor Marlowe talks about. So how does this affect those neighborhoods in the city who close down streets for Halloween?
In all cases, if you're going to close a public street, then you're required to have a street closure permit. So that basically would become one of these block parties. They come in, they fill out the application for the special temporary use permit. I'd review it. We'd coordinate with Public Works for the street closure, and then they would get their permit. So if you have a neighborhood that's closing streets without a permit, even without this ordinance, it's actually in violation. If you're ever going to close a public street, you have to have the, at the very least, the street closure permit.
How does this affect private roadway?
If it's generally, if it's a public conveyance, if it's open to the public, it would still fall under the requirement of having that street closure permit, temporary street closure permit.
Other questions?
If you close it, then it wouldn't be open to the public. But de facto,
Brian, would this, let's say the next wave of thought is, okay, we won't block up the streets, but we're gonna find somebody's field and we're just gonna drive out into the field and we're gonna have would you fall under this ordinance or would you just fall under trespassing, noise ordinance? What if I had permission of the landowner?
Mr. Mayor, if you had a permission from the landowner and you wanted to hold one of those other events that is basically a commercial event, it would require a special temporary use permit, but that would be at the next level.
Right.
That would require planning and zoning board review as well as the review by the Board of Adjustment, or it's actually, excuse me, City Commission.
And I don't think I added this, but Alachua County Sheriff's deputies are paying really close attention to this because these are really dangerous situations. If they can find and track these parties and be there at the beginning, then they are pretty successful at dispersing. If they only hear about it when they wake up the elderly residents and it's 2 o'clock in the morning and there's already 2,000 people there, it becomes really, really tough at that point to disperse. They had one incident in Hawthorne where a woman was shot and the party goers would not let ASO get in to give aid to the woman. And so they could not get her out. And so they have really asked us to work on this. And so, as all of these ordinances, it's difficult once the situation is out of hand. But if we can give this some ammunition to ASO of, hey, Newberry has said, we do allow things to happen, but this is the process that you have to go through, and these are the limitations that you can go through. I know that they would be very appreciative.
But
Jessica.
Mr. Chair, in that case though, if they're doing it with no permission, what would this ordinance do to prevent them from just finding a street and having a party anyway?
Well, the way that Newberry has handled this is largely the mayor happens to be a high school teacher and is in contact with a lot of ex-students who are engaged in this business. And so we've worked really well at making sure the communication is going back and forth. There are some people who are trying to engage in this as a business, and this is kind of, you have some people who are trying to walk around and say, how do I have this? And I still to this day, after 3 years, have not figured out how people are making money here. But somebody has to be making money in this some way, but it's about how many people you could turn out to these events and then translating those numbers into future deals with music industries or clubs or something of that nature. So, which is kind of my comment, we have to still be proactive at getting there ahead of time, because clearly if I'm willing to just pull into a neighborhood and park in the middle of the street and open my doors, I'm kind of beyond permits and those kinds of things. But and this happened to us before we shored up our noise ordinance. The ASO would get there and they'd say, and someone would say, well, that's my grandma and I'm in her yard and I'm, I have permission. And then that throws ASO into sort of a gray, vague area. And then they have to, so this sort of puts a lot of our rules and regulations into one neatly packaged ordinance that is very clear to ASO that they can draw to and say, no, you have to disperse. we have any other comments, thoughts from the board? We had a recommended action. Do we hear a motion? Anyone ready? Make a motion. Recommended action was to adopt. Gavin?
I'll make a
Have
motion to approve as written.
Okay, I have a motion to approve as written. Do I hear a second?
A second.
I have a second from Bill. So the motion was made by Gavin, second was by Bill. Any further comments or questions on the motion on the floor from the board? Hearing none, we'll move to public comment. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of conversation on item 4 on tonight's published agenda. This is about allowing neighborhood block parties under specific conditions. If you'd like to call in and make a comment on tonight's conversation, all you need to do to accomplish that is dial the phone number that's on your screen. That'll get you in the meeting. Once you're in the meeting, look to the bottom of your screen, see a little hand symbol. Click that hand symbol. That'll let us know you'd like to address the board. We'll make sure you have the opportunity to do so. We're going to start with live comment in the chamber, then we'll move to virtual comment. Do you have anybody live tonight who'd like to make a comment on the motion on the floor? Seeing none, we'll move to virtual comment. Do I have any virtual hands raised? Seeing none, we'll come back for a roll call vote. Let's start with Miss Linda.
Aye.
Gavin.
Aye.
Bill. Aye. Jessica.
Aye.
Naeem. Motion passed unanimously. That's going to move us to new item 5, which was item 3. This is amending regulations to provide for streamlined administrative approval of accessory structures within rear setbacks, yard setbacks based on specific criteria. We have Wendy back with us. Hopefully this item will move quickly. This is the long awaited return of what this board initiated and asked for. Wendy, take it away.
All right, we could put the presentation up on the screen.
We got it. It's on the screen, Miss Wendy.
I can't see it.
We see it. You just talk your way through it. Can you pull it up on your computer?
Yeah, I can pull it up on mine.
Then
Let's
you
see.
just tell us to
Okay.
advance it, we'll advance it here.
Okay, well, I'll just look. If you could just follow along with me, I'll talk from what I can see on my screen. So this is a request to streamline and provide an administrative approval process to approve accessory structures. This was initiated by the Board of Adjustment and recommended by the Planning and Zoning Board to follow through with this to allow an administrative approval process for those structures within rear yard setbacks up to the rear property line. Essentially, frequent variance requests had come before the Planning and Zoning Board and the Board of Adjustment to place both, whether it was a temporary or a permanent structure as an accessory structure, of course. In the rear yard, it could be a few feet from or all the way right up to the property line on the rear yard. So to date, all those kinds of requests were all approved by the Board of Adjustment and also recommended approval by the Planning and Zoning Board. And these situations were all properties that were requested for the accessory structure to back up right to the rear property line, but it was backing up to non-residential property that had an actual designation as common open space or drainage or conservation areas, roadway, commercially zoned property, and similar. So essentially, those types of process, normally if you had to come through a variance review process, that takes the 2 public hearings before the Planning and Zoning Board and the Board of Adjustment. It takes several weeks to go through that process. If we do an administrative approval process, that can take just 1 to 5 days, business days. So it can be done much more quickly. And as I said, this was a request that the Board of Adjustment asked that the city go ahead and we staff draft these amendments and bring it back before you. And you have before you a draft ordinance, and in that shows you the change that's proposed with an additional administrative approval process to allow permanent and temporary accessory structures within required rear yard setbacks based on specified criteria. And that is that the land development regulation administrator or designee would be authorized to administratively approve these applications, whether it's for a permanent or a temporary accessory structure within that required rear yard setback right up to the property line. Remember that normally temporary structures can go 5 feet from the rear yard property line. But in this case, it would be able to be approved administratively anywhere up to that property line for 3 feet, 1 foot, and on the property line. And only if it abuts property that's designated non-residential, it's publicly or privately owned or maintained stormwater management detention or retention area, open space, conservation, roadway, or commercially zoned property. So it goes through your ordinance. Also, we looked at each type of district that allows for residential type uses and inserted that requirement as one of the allowed uses instructors, saying that those things would be allowed in accordance with that section that I just read through on the previous slide. So that would be allowed according to those different districts that are listed in that ordinance. This just gives you the language that goes for each one of those districts. So that concludes staff's report. And the recommendation is that you would recommend to the City Commission approval of ordinance 2021-10 for application LDR 2107.
Thank you, Ms. Wendy. Questions, comments, thoughts from the board?
Appreciate it. I think it's going to be a big time saver and a streamlining for our citizens. I appreciate all the work that Wendy and staff did on putting this together. Hope it makes things go smoothly.
That sounds almost like a motion.
And I move to approve.
Okay, I have a motion
Second.
to approve.
City to approve.
I have a motion to approve from Bill, a second from Naeem. Thoughts, questions, comments on the motion on the floor? Seeing none from the dais, we'll move to public comment. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of item 5, which used to be item 3. This is about streamlining our administrative approval for accessory structures. We hope that this makes our staff able to be more responsive to our residents. We appreciate the work that staff has done here. If you'd like to call in and make a comment, you can accomplish that by dialing the number on the screen. That will get you in the meeting. Once you're in the meeting, look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little hand symbol. Simply click that hand symbol. That lets know you'd like to address the board. Make sure you have the opportunity to do so. We're going to begin with live comment, and then we're going to go to virtual comment. Does anyone live in the chamber would like to talk to the board on the motion on the floor? Seeing none, do we have any virtual commenters? Seeing none, we're going to go to roll call vote. Gavin?
I actually have a question that I
Okay.
should have thought of before we get to this. Is there a revenue loss to the city by changing this process? And is it significant? What are the thoughts on the fees for the shortened process?
I have 2 heads going no.
No, there would not be any loss of revenue to the city. It would just be a savings really because of the time savings for staff and the money that goes with that and the
Okay.
advertising cost for the applicant.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Think of all
My
the
vote is
200
yes.
page backups.
Mr.
Hey,
Chair,
Brian wants to add to that answer,
Just-
Gavin.
Just to be clear, there is a $200 application fee that we would no longer be charging because it would just be signed off on administratively. But to Wendy's point, when you add up the staff time and advertising and everything else, the $200 wouldn't really cover it. So that I think there would actually be a net savings overall. But there
Okay,
is a
great.
$200 fee for the variance application that we will no longer have to charge for this.
Does that give you a fuller answer, Gavin?
Yes, thank you.
And your vote is still aye?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, sir. Ms. Linda?
Aye.
Bill? Jessica?
Aye.
Naeem? Motion passes unanimously. Ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning of the meeting, we tabled or we moved items 6, 7, and 8 to a special meeting on March 15th. And we moved item 9 to the next P and Z meeting in April. So that's going to take us down to topics from members for discussion. And Ms. Linden, let's start with you. Do you have any topics?
I'm sorry. I was flipping through my packet. Can you go back to that? We're at where?
We've come to the end of the meeting, Ms. Linda, since we tabled all the other items. So
Oh,
we're
I
at
got you.
topics.
Time to go to the
have none.
store.
I have none. No.
Thank you, ma'am.
nothing.
Gavin?
I have nothing.
Thank you, sir. Bill? Jessica? Naeem?
Uh,
Okay, we have a lot happening. Before we get to that, I want to thank Bill for buying the entire chamber coffee. We appreciate that. It was delicious. Joel's coffee. We appreciate that. This weekend, we have the Vintage Market that's held by Sycamore Lane. We also have a vaccine information walk that's going to happen. So by Saturday, even if we don't get to your door, I should be educated on the latest information about how to register for vaccine, where to register for vaccine, what our best projections about when those vaccines are going to come in. If you are worried that we won't get to you, you can certainly reach out to me, and I'll make sure that that I get with all of our social media administrators and get something posted. Or you can email me, and I'll try to answer you. I get my education Friday night, and then we'll start knocking on doors and distributing. And we're going to try to actually help people register and get on waiting lists, and that will happen on Saturday. And then, of course, we have our ribbon cutting ceremony Saturday night for the brand new IFAS Extension office. So that's very exciting. So we would love for you guys to. That is open to the public. It'll be socially distanced. Masks will be mandatory. Am I missing anything about that one? Ag Center, Equestrian Center, not IFAS. I got that part wrong. But it is beautiful. The county has done a wonderful job. I think that we're up to about $15 million that they've invested in the city of Newberry in renovating that facility. So hopefully it's a long process, and a lot of people in our city are responsible for making this happen. A great partnership. So we hope everybody can make it out. Bill?
So will the youth agricultural fair be there in March?
It will. It will. They're going to be
No idea.
Saturday. Yes, I think that's why we're doing yeah. So we had some kids out there helping set up last weekend. So very excited. So I think that is.
I have one
I think
thing.
that's all for me.
Can you
Ms.
hear me,
Linda.
Jordan? Yes, two things, two important things. This coming Saturday is as you said, the youth fair, but at 6 o'clock is the hog showing. That is how, when the judge will be there and the kids are going to show their hogs. And then on Sunday.
And Sierra's going to
will
start
be-
by hog calling for us.
Sierra is a hog calling star. She certainly is. It's
I've
really
lost her in
an
2 talent
exciting
shows,
thing, and that 4-H project is absolutely incredible. It really is. I have a great granddaughter who is showing, and we are taking anybody who wants to do add-ons for her hog. So I wanted to give you that opportunity. If you would like to contact us, that would be fine. Last but not least is Brian. Can you hear me?
He can.
Wendy?
She can.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I was very impressed with ELEEMOSYNARY. All of my grandchildren had to look that up. And I just wondered how. I've never seen it, never heard of it. It's kind of like alms, to beg for alms, to give somebody money or something. Where did y'all find it?
Mr. Chair, I have to admit that predates my time here. I've wondered that myself. It's actually a word that I've vowed to take out of the code someday.
That'll be the next item agenda in April.
Okay, good.
All right. Rich, you have any comments?
No, I don't, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Thank you. With that, then, we are